You step out of your time machine in medieval England, careful not to disturb anything, but your foot crushes a single blade of grass. That grass would have been eaten by a beetle, which would have been eaten by a bird, which would have distracted a horse, causing a knight to arrive at a battle 3 seconds later. Those 3 seconds change who lives and dies. Different people marry, have different children. Within 5 generations, not a single person who should have been born exists. By the time you return to your present, you don't just find a different world. You find a world where humanity never invented the printing press, never discovered America, never split the atom. All because you stepped on grass. This is the nightmare of the butterfly effect in time travel. The terrifying mathematical truth that in any complex system, microscopic changes amplify exponentially until they reshape everything. Unlike killing your grandfather, which creates a logical paradox, or meeting yourself, which challenges identity, the butterfly effect suggests something worse. That even if time travel is possible, it's unusable. Every trip to the past, no matter how careful, would unleash chaos mathematics that transform the future beyond recognition. You wouldn't need to change history. Your mere presence, displacing air molecules, radiating body heat, carrying bacteria from the future, would be enough to unravel everything you've ever known. The grandfather paradox. The year is 1905, and somewhere in Austria, a young man sits at a cafe, sketching in his notebook. He dreams of becoming an artist, unaware that history will remember him for something far darker. Now imagine you could travel back to that moment, knowing what this young Adolf Hitler would become. You could prevent the Holocaust, World War II, the deaths of millions. All it would take is one action, one moment of intervention. But here's where our story takes a curious turn, because the moment you succeed, the very reason for your journey disappears. If Hitler never rises to power, you never grow up in a world scarred by his actions, never develop the desire to go back and stop him. So how could you have traveled back in the first place? This is the grandfather paradox in one of its most morally charged forms, though the original version is both simpler and somehow more disturbing. Imagine instead that you travel back in time and accidentally or deliberately cause the death of your own grandfather before he meets your grandmother. The logic seems to unravel itself like a sweater with a loose thread. If your grandfather dies young, your parent is never born. If your parent is never born, neither are you. But if you were never born, who traveled back in time to cause your grandfather's death? The universe seems to tie itself in an impossible knot. Let me tell you about a conversation I once overheard between 2 physicists at a university conference. They were discussing this very paradox over coffee, and one of them said something that stuck with me. She said that time travel paradoxes are like trying to become your own parent, not biologically, but causally. You're trying to be the cause of the very circumstances that created you, or in this case, trying to eliminate the circumstances that led to your existence. It's like a snake swallowing its own tail, except the tail disappears the moment the snake succeeds. The grandfather paradox was first described in this form by science fiction writers in the 1940s and 50s, though philosophers had been grappling with similar temporal puzzles for much longer. The French writer René Barjavel wrote about it in his 1943 novel, Le Voyageur Imprudent, The Imprudent Traveler, where his protagonist faces exactly this dilemma. But the roots go deeper, back to ancient Greek philosophers who wondered about fate and free will, about whether the future could influence the past. Think about how we understand cause and effect in our daily lives. You plant a seed, and later a tree grows. You study for an exam, and consequently, you pass it. The cause always comes before the effect, as surely as Tuesday comes before Wednesday. This is so fundamental to how we experience reality that we rarely question it. But time travel seems to threaten this basic order. It's like trying to have Wednesday cause Tuesday, or having the tree plant its own seed. Some physicists have proposed fascinating solutions to this paradox. One is called the Novikov self-consistency principle, named after Russian physicist Igor Novikov. Imagine time as a river that has already carved its path from the mountains to the sea. You can travel up and down this river, but you cannot change its course because its course already includes your travels. In this view, if you went back in time to kill your grandfather, something would always prevent you. The gun would jam. You'd slip on a banana peel. You'd have a change of heart. The universe, in this interpretation, is like a completed jigsaw puzzle. Every piece, including your time travel, already fits perfectly into place. This brings us to a deeper question about the nature of time itself. We experience time as a flowing river, carrying us from past to future. But many physicists see time differently, as a dimension like space. Just as the entire length of a road exists simultaneously, even though you can only be at one point on it at any given moment. Perhaps all moments in time exist simultaneously in what physicists call the block universe. Your birth, your death. This very moment as you listen to these words, all exist eternally in this four-dimensional space-time block. But there's another solution to the grandfather paradox that's even stranger. Hugh Everett, a physicist working in the 1950s, proposed what we now call the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics. In this view, every possible outcome of every event creates a new universe. When you flip a coin, in one universe it lands heads, in another tails. Both universes are equally real. Apply this to time travel, and something remarkable happens. When you go back in time and prevent your grandfather from meeting your grandmother, you don't erase yourself. Instead, you create a new branch of reality where you were never born, while the universe you came from continues to exist. You become a visitor from a parallel timeline, a ghost of a future that this universe will never see. Consider for a moment what this means for the Hitler scenario. You travel back and prevent his rise to power. In this new timeline, World War II, as we know it, never happens. Millions live who would have died. Cities stand that would have been destroyed. But the timeline you came from, the one scarred by the Holocaust, still exists somewhere in the quantum multiverse. You haven't erased that suffering. You've only created a world where it didn't happen. It's like reading a book and wishing you could change the ending. Even if you write a different ending in a new copy, the original book still exists on someone's shelf. The philosopher David Lewis proposed yet another solution. He suggested that when we talk about possibility and impossibility in time travel, we need to be very careful about what we mean. According to Lewis, when you travel to the past, you have the ability to kill your grandfather in one sense but not in another. You have the ability in that you have a gun, you know how to use it, you're standing right there. But you don't have the ability in that the action would create a logical contradiction, and logical contradictions simply cannot occur in reality. It's like saying you have the ability to draw a square circle. You have a pencil, you have paper, you know how to draw, but the thing you're trying to create is inherently impossible. This connects to an ancient philosophical puzzle about free will and determinism. If you could see the future with perfect clarity, would you be able to change it? Or would your attempts to change it be part of what brings that future about? The ancient Greeks told the story of Oedipus, who learned from an oracle that he would kill his father and marry his mother. Every action he took to avoid this fate led him closer to it. His foster parents, trying to protect him from the prophecy, never told him he was adopted. Fleeing from them to avoid killing the man he thought was his father, he encountered his real father on the road and killed him in a quarrel. The prophecy fulfilled itself through the very attempts to avoid it. Time travel stories often follow this pattern. A man learns he will die in a plane crash and drives to the airport to warn his younger self not to take the flight. On the way, he causes a traffic accident that makes his younger self late for the original flight, forcing him to take a different plane, the one that crashes. The loop closes itself with an elegant and terrible precision. But perhaps we're thinking about this all wrong. Perhaps the real paradox isn't about time travel at all, but about our assumption that we understand causation. The philosopher David Hume argued centuries ago that we never actually see causation. We see one billiard ball move toward another. We see them touch. We see the second ball move. But the causation itself, the transfer of force, the necessary connection between cause and effect, this we never observe. We only see patterns, regularities, habits of nature. Modern physics has made this even stranger. In quantum mechanics, particles can be entangled in such a way that measuring one instantly affects the other, even if they're light years apart. This isn't quite backward causation, but it suggests that our everyday understanding of cause and effect, of before and after, might be a limited perspective on a reality far stranger than we imagine. There's a thought experiment I'd like you to consider. Imagine you're watching a movie about someone who travels back in time. In the movie, they successfully change the past. But movies are fixed. Every time you watch it, the same things happen in the same order. The film strip already contains every frame, beginning to end. Is this any different from the block universe physicists describe? If all of time already exists, if past, present, and future are all equally real, then perhaps free will itself is an illusion, and the grandfather paradox is simply revealing something disturbing about the nature of reality. Some philosophers have suggested that time travel is impossible precisely because it leads to these paradoxes. They argue that any universe coherent enough to support conscious observers must have a strict separation between past and future. Just as you cannot walk north from the North Pole, perhaps you simply cannot travel backward through time. The universe's structure forbids it, like a one-way valve that allows water to flow in only one direction. But even if physical time travel is impossible, we engage in mental time travel every day. Memory takes us backward. Imagination carries us forward. And here's where things get interesting. Your memories of the past actually change each time you recall them. Neuroscientists have discovered that remembering something is not like playing back a recording. It's more like reconstructing a building from a blueprint, and each reconstruction can introduce small changes. In a sense, you're constantly rewriting your own past. This brings us to a final twist in our exploration of the grandfather paradox. What if the past isn't as fixed as we think? What if it's more like the quantum world, where things remain in a state of possibility until they're observed? Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest that the past doesn't become fully real until it's measured in the present. In this view, traveling back in time wouldn't change a fixed past, but would instead collapse quantum possibilities into a particular history. As you drift off to sleep tonight, consider this. Every decision you make sends ripples through time. Your choices affect the future, obviously, but they also determine which past matters. If you decide to become a doctor, your childhood interest in biology becomes part of the causal chain leading to your career. If you become a musician instead, different childhood experiences become significant. In a sense, you're constantly choosing not just your future, but which version of your past was the real one, the one that led to this moment. The grandfather paradox asks whether you could go back and prevent your own existence. But perhaps the deeper question is whether you need to. Every moment, you're creating yourself anew, writing and rewriting the story of who you are. The past shapes you, but it doesn't define you. You are not merely the effect of prior causes, but an active participant in creating meaning from the flow of time. Somewhere in the quantum multiverse, perhaps there's a version of history where Hitler became a painter, where your grandfather took a different path, where every tragedy was averted. But we live in this timeline, with its particular mixture of joy and sorrow, triumph and catastrophe. We cannot change what was, but we're constantly changing what it means. The past is gone, but not fixed, because its significance depends on what we do with the present. And so, the grandfather paradox leaves us not with an answer, but with a deeper appreciation of time's mystery. We are creatures of causation, bound by the arrow of time, yet capable of imagining ourselves outside it. We can think about changing the past even if we cannot do it. And in that gap between imagination and reality, between what is and what might have been, we find the space where free will dances with determinism, where the future reaches back to touch the past, where every moment is both ending and beginning. The young man in that Austrian cafe finishes his sketch and closes his notebook. History awaits him, terrible and unchangeable. Or perhaps, in another quantum branch, he orders another coffee and keeps drawing, and the 20th century unfolds differently. Both possibilities exist somewhere in the infinite library of time. The paradox remains, neither resolved nor dissolved, but simply held in the mind like a koan. a question that changes us not through its answer, but through our contemplation of it. The bootstrap paradox. A melody drifts through your mind, something hauntingly beautiful that you've never heard before. You hum it absently while walking through the park, and a stranger stops you. "That's lovely," they say. "What's it called?" You shrug, unable to place it. Years later, you discover time travel, and on a whim, you journey back 50 years. In a small cafe, you hum that same melody. A young musician at the next table frantically scribbles it down, thanks you profusely, and rushes off. The next day, you see a poster. That musician is performing their new composition tonight, the very melody you hummed. You attend the concert, and there it is, note for note. This song becomes a classic, passed down through generations until one day, decades from when you started, you hear it as a child. It lodges in your memory, waiting for the day you'll hum it in a park, starting the whole cycle again. But here's the question that should make your mind reel. Who composed this melody? Where did it come from? It seems to exist without origin, without a creator, a perfect circle in time with no beginning and no end. The melody pulls itself into existence by its own bootstraps, hence the name of our paradox. The bootstrap paradox is perhaps the strangest of all temporal puzzles, because it doesn't involve preventing something from happening or creating logical contradictions. Instead, it presents us with something far more unsettling. Information, objects, even people potentially, that seem to come from nowhere at all. They exist because they exist, created by nothing more than the loop of causation bending back on itself. Let me share with you a thought that occurred to me while reading an old physics textbook. Imagine you're struggling with quantum mechanics, unable to grasp the equations. Then you find a brilliant textbook that explains everything perfectly. The concepts click, the math makes sense, and you become an expert. Years later, you travel back in time and decide to help your younger self. You write out everything you learned, creating the very textbook that taught you. But who originally understood quantum mechanics? Who first worked out those equations? The knowledge appears to spring from nothing, teaching itself to itself. This paradox gets its name from a strange phrase, pulling yourself up by your own bootstraps, which originally described an impossible task. The image is absurd if you think about it. Reaching down, grabbing your own boots, and lifting yourself into the air. It violates basic physics. Yet, the bootstrap paradox suggests that information and objects might do exactly this through the mechanism of time travel, lifting themselves into existence through circular causation. Robert Heinlein explored this idea in his 1941 story, By His Bootstraps, where a man meets multiple versions of himself from different points in his timeline, each manipulating the others to ensure their own existence. But the concept goes deeper than science fiction. It touches on fundamental questions about the nature of existence, creativity, and the origin of information itself. Consider Shakespeare's Hamlet. Imagine a time traveler who loves this play goes back to 1599, before Shakespeare wrote it. Finding the bard, struggling with writer's block, our traveler recites the play from memory. Shakespeare, amazed, writes it all down and publishes it. The play becomes immortal, eventually reaching our time traveler, who memorizes it and takes it back. But who wrote Hamlet in this loop? Not Shakespeare, he merely transcribed it. Not the time traveler, who only memorized what already existed. The play writes itself through the loop of time. The bootstrap paradox becomes even stranger when we consider physical objects. A watch, for instance, passed from future to past in an endless cycle. Your grandmother gives you an antique watch, a family heirloom she says has been passed down for generations. Decades later, you travel back in time and, through some circumstance, end up giving this very watch to your young grandmother. She treasures it, eventually passing it on to you. The watch has no manufacturer, no point of creation. It simply exists within this temporal loop. But here's where physics makes things interesting. Objects age. They experience entropy, the gradual increase in disorder that affects everything in our universe. That watch should accumulate scratches, its gears should wear down, its metal should oxidize. After cycling through time indefinitely, it should be nothing but dust. Yet, if it crumbles to dust, it cannot be passed back to complete the loop. The paradox seems to violate the second law of thermodynamics, one of the most fundamental principles in physics. Unless, perhaps, the loop isn't perfectly circular, but more like a spiral that appears circular from a certain angle. What if each iteration involves slight changes, quantum fluctuations that gradually alter the information or object? The melody you pass back might be subtly different each time, evolving through infinite loops until it reaches a stable form, like a river finding its course. This still doesn't tell us where it originally came from, but it suggests the universe might have ways of smoothing out these temporal wrinkles. The physicist Igor Novikov, whom we mentioned earlier, proposed that the universe might be self-consistent in a way that prevents paradoxes. In his view, the bootstrap paradox isn't really a paradox at all. The information or object doesn't come from nowhere. It was always part of the universe's structure. Asking where it came from is like asking what's north of the North Pole. The question assumes a linear timeline that doesn't apply to closed time-like curves. This connects to a profound question in physics. Why does the universe exist at all? We usually think everything needs a cause, a reason for being. But what caused the Big Bang? What came before the beginning? Some physicists suggest the universe might be its own cause, a self-creating system that bootstraps itself into existence. The bootstrap paradox might not be a flaw in our thinking about time travel, but a glimpse into the fundamental nature of existence itself. Think about consciousness for a moment. Your sense of self, your awareness of being aware, seems to bootstrap itself into existence every morning when you wake up. You become conscious of being conscious, a loop of self-reference that philosophers have puzzled over for centuries. The thought that thinks itself, the eye that sees itself seeing. Perhaps the bootstrap paradox is showing us that closed loops of causation are not impossible but fundamental to how complex systems, perhaps even the universe itself, come into being. In quantum mechanics, virtual particles pop into existence from nothing, borrowing energy from the vacuum of space as long as they pay it back quickly enough. They bootstrap themselves into temporary existence. Some physicists speculate that the entire universe might be a quantum fluctuation that hasn't yet paid back its borrowed energy, a cosmic bootstrap paradox on the grandest scale. But let's return to more human concerns. Stories have always fascinated me because they're a kind of bootstrap paradox themselves. Where do stories come from? A storyteller tells a tale they heard from another storyteller who heard it from another, stretching back through time. But who told the first story? And more mysteriously, stories about time travel existed long before anyone seriously thought time travel might be possible. It's as if the idea pulled itself into existence, preparing our minds for a possibility that hadn't yet been discovered. Consider the strange case of inspiration itself. Artists often describe their greatest works as coming from somewhere beyond themselves. They feel like conduits rather than creators. Mozart claimed his symphonies appeared in his mind complete, needing only to be written down. Kekulé discovered the structure of benzene in a dream of a snake eating its tail. Tesla visualized his inventions in perfect detail before building them. What if consciousness occasionally touches something outside normal time, glimpsing information that bootstraps itself into existence through the act of creation? The bootstrap paradox also raises disturbing questions about free will. If you travel back and give yourself the winning lottery numbers, numbers you only know because you gave them to yourself, did you choose those numbers? Your past self plays them because your future self provided them, and your future self knows them because your past self won them. Choice seems to evaporate in the face of circular causation. This reminds me of a story from Hindu mythology about the god Vishnu, who dreams the universe into existence. In the dream, beings arise who worship Vishnu, and their worship sustains him as he continues dreaming. The universe creates its creator, who creates the universe, an eternal bootstrap paradox at the heart of existence. Ancient wisdom traditions often embraced paradoxes that Western logic finds troubling, seeing them not as problems to solve, but as pointers to truths beyond ordinary understanding. Modern information theory adds another layer to this puzzle. Information, unlike matter and energy, can be copied without being depleted. If I tell you a story, I still have the story. We both possess it fully. This makes information fundamentally different from physical objects. A bootstrap paradox involving information might not violate any conservation laws because information doesn't follow the same rules as matter and energy. It can seemingly create itself through loops without violating physical principles. But there's something even stranger to consider. In our digital age, we're surrounded by copies of copies, information endlessly duplicated and transmitted. Every time you send a text message, it's copied multiple times as it travels through various servers. The original and the copy are indistinguishable. If information can exist without a clear point of origin in space, bouncing between servers around the world, why not in time as well? The philosopher Douglas Hofstadter wrote about strange loops, patterns that arise when systems become self-referential. His famous example is the sentence, "This statement is false. If it's true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's true." It bootstraps itself into paradox through self-reference. Hofstadter suggests that consciousness itself might be such a strange loop, the brain creating a model of itself that includes the model-making process, an infinite recursion that generates self-awareness. Perhaps the bootstrap paradox is trying to tell us something about the nature of existence that our linear, cause and effect thinking can't quite grasp. We assume everything must have a beginning because that's how we experience life. We're born, we live, we die. Stories have beginnings, middles, and ends. But what if that's just our limited perspective? What if reality is more like a vast web where everything causes everything else, where the future reaches back to create the past that creates the future? Think about your own life for a moment. You make decisions based on who you believe yourself to be. But who you believe yourself to be comes from the decisions you've made. Your identity bootstraps itself into existence through this circular process. The story you tell about yourself becomes true through the telling, and it was always true because you were always going to tell it. Scientists studying complex systems have discovered that feedback loops can generate surprisingly sophisticated patterns. When a system's output becomes its input, it can bootstrap itself into higher levels of organization. This is how life itself might have emerged from non-living chemistry, molecules catalyzing the creation of copies of themselves until the whole system lifted itself into biology through its own bootstraps. The universe seems to delight in these loops. The Earth's climate is regulated by feedback loops. Ecosystems balance themselves through predator-prey cycles. Your body maintains its temperature through circular causation, each effect becoming a cause that maintains the stable pattern of your existence. Perhaps time loops, rather than being impossible paradoxes, are simply feedback mechanisms we don't yet understand. Ways for the universe to create and maintain stable patterns across time rather than just space. As you lie there in the darkness, consider this thought. Every atom in your body, except hydrogen, was forged in the heart of a dying star. The elements that make you were scattered across space in supernova explosions, eventually gathering to form Earth, evolving into life, into consciousness, into you lying here contemplating your own existence. And someday, billions of years from now, the sun will expand and scatter these atoms again, perhaps to form new stars, new worlds, new beings contemplating their existence. Is this not a kind of cosmic bootstrap paradox? Matter organizing itself into consciousness that contemplates matter. The bootstrap paradox asks us where information comes from when it seems to create itself through time loops. But perhaps it's showing us that our question is wrong. We ask, where does it come from? Because we think in terms of locations in space and moments in time. But information might exist in a realm beyond both, touching our universe at various points, appearing to loop through time when really it's simply revealing itself through whatever pathways are available. In the end, the bootstrap paradox leaves us with a profound mystery. It suggests that existence might not need an external cause, that things can be self-causing, self-creating, self-sustaining through loops of causation that our linear thinking struggles to comprehend. The melody that teaches itself to itself, the story that tells itself into being, the universe that dreams itself into existence. And perhaps that's why we find such paradoxes both troubling and fascinating. They hint at something beyond our ordinary understanding, a deeper structure to reality where cause and effect dance in circles rather than marching in straight lines, where information can exist without origin, where the future creates the past, where impossible things become possible through the strange loops of time. Tomorrow, you might hum a melody you've never heard before. Someone might ask you where it came from, and you won't be able to say. But now you'll wonder, is this tune truly new? Or is it an echo from a loop that hasn't closed yet? A future memory of a past that's still to come? The bootstrap paradox suggests that such questions aren't just philosophical curiosities, but might touch on the fundamental nature of time, causation, and existence itself. In the silence between heartbeats, in the pause between thoughts, perhaps you can sense it. The vast web of causation, where everything connects to everything else across space and time, where beginnings and endings are just arbitrary points we mark on circles that have neither, where existence bootstraps itself into being through the sheer impossibility of non-existence. The paradox remains, not as a problem to be solved, but as a doorway to wonder, reminding us that reality is far stranger and more beautiful than our ordinary thinking can grasp. The predestination paradox. A woman stands at a train station on a rainy evening in 1962, waiting for a train that will never come. She doesn't know this yet. She's young, perhaps 25, clutching a letter that will change everything. A stranger approaches her, an older man with kind eyes, who suggests she take the bus instead. Something about him seems familiar, though she's certain they've never met. She follows his advice, and on that bus, she meets the man she'll marry. Years later, their son grows up obsessed with the story of how his parents met. He becomes fascinated with time, with chance, with the delicate threads that weave lives together. He invents time travel and journeys back to ensure his parents meet, becoming the stranger at the train station who diverts his mother to the bus. Without his intervention, he would never have been born. But he could only intervene because he was born. The circle completes itself with the precision of a clockwork universe. This is the predestination paradox, perhaps the most elegant and unsettling of all temporal puzzles. Unlike the grandfather paradox, which threatens logical contradiction, or the bootstrap paradox, which questions the origin of information, the predestination paradox suggests something far more disturbing. That free will might be an illusion, that every choice has already been made, that we are actors performing a script we wrote for ourselves in a future that has already happened. Think about the last major decision you made. Perhaps you chose a job, ended a relationship, moved to a new city. It felt like a choice, didn't it? You weighed options, considered alternatives, maybe even flipped a coin. But what if that decision was always going to happen exactly as it did? What if your future self has already lived through the consequences and, through some twist of causation, reached back to ensure you made that very choice? The predestination paradox differs from simple determinism in a crucial way. Determinism suggests that given the state of the universe at any moment, there's only one possible future, like dominoes falling in an inevitable sequence. But the predestination paradox goes further. It suggests that the future actively participates in creating the past, that causation runs both ways through time, that the dominoes at the end of the line reach back to ensure the first one falls. I once read about an archaeological discovery that beautifully illustrates this concept. In the 1920s, archaeologists excavating an ancient Egyptian tomb found a sealed room with hieroglyphs warning of a curse. The walls described a prophecy that the tomb would be opened when the stars aligned in a particular configuration, which astronomers calculated would occur in 1922. The prophecy was right, down to the very month. But here's the twist. The expedition was only funded because a wealthy patron had read about this prophecy in an obscure manuscript and wanted to test it. The tomb was discovered because of the prophecy about its discovery. The prediction created its own fulfillment. This paradox appears throughout human mythology and literature, suggesting it touches something deep in our experience of time and causation. The oracle at Delphi tells Oedipus he will kill his father and marry his mother. Every step he takes to avoid this fate leads him toward it. Macbeth learns he will become king, and in trying to accelerate the prophecy, sets in motion the very events that fulfill it. These stories resonate because we recognize something true in them about the mysterious relationship between knowledge and action, between prediction and outcome. Consider how this plays out in your own life. You check the weather forecast and see rain, so you bring an umbrella. But what if everyone else sees the same forecast and stays home, changing traffic patterns, altering who you meet, shifting the entire day's trajectory? The prediction changes behavior, which changes outcomes, which validates or invalidates the prediction. Now imagine this happening across time, rather than just space. A future event reaches back through a chain of consequences to ensure its own occurrence. Modern physics offers a startling perspective on this paradox. In quantum mechanics, particles don't have definite properties until they're measured. An electron exists in a superposition of states, potentially here and there, spinning up and down, until observation collapses it into a single state. But here's where it gets strange. Experiments have shown that future measurements can influence past states. It's called retrocausation, and while controversial, it suggests that the future might indeed reach back to influence the past at the quantum level. The physicist John Wheeler proposed something even more radical with his delayed choice experiment. Light from a distant quasar, billions of light years away, can take two paths around an intervening galaxy to reach Earth. Quantum mechanics says the light exists as a wave, taking both paths until we observe it, at which point it becomes a particle that took one path or the other. But this means our observation today determines which path the light took billions of years ago. The present reaches back to define the past. This brings us to a profound question about the nature of time itself. We experience time as flowing from past to future, but the equations of physics work equally well backward and forward. They don't distinguish between past and future any more than they distinguish between left and right. The arrow of time we experience might be a consequence of entropy, of the universe moving from order to disorder, but the underlying reality might be timeless, with all moments existing simultaneously. Imagine time as a vast tapestry already woven, every thread in place. We experience it linearly, following one thread from beginning to end, but the whole pattern already exists. In this view, the predestination paradox isn't a paradox at all. The future doesn't reach back to change the past, because past, present, and future are all equally real, all part of the same eternal pattern. What we call causation is just the way the pattern looks when viewed from within time, rather than outside it. But this raises troubling questions about responsibility and meaning. If everything is predestined, if our choices are illusions, if we're merely playing out a script that's already written, what's the point of anything? Why struggle? Why strive? Why care? The predestination paradox seems to drain life of its significance, reducing us to automata performing predetermined actions. Yet consider this: even if your actions are predestined, they're still your actions. The person who will make tomorrow's choices is you, even if those choices are already woven into the fabric of space-time. The meaning you find, the love you feel, the beauty you perceive, these are no less real for being inevitable. A sunset doesn't become less beautiful when you understand the physics of light scattering. A piece of music doesn't lose its power when you know it will end on the tonic chord. There's a story I think about often. A man discovers he can see one day into the future. He sees himself having breakfast, going to work, meeting a friend for lunch. He tries to do something different, anything different, but finds himself inexorably living out exactly what he foresaw. At first, this drives him to despair, but gradually he realizes something profound. He still experiences hunger before breakfast, still tastes the food, still enjoys his friend's company. The experience remains real, even if the outcome is certain. Predestination doesn't eliminate experience. It just means experience has a shape, a structure, a destiny. The predestination paradox also appears in how we understand ourselves. You are who you are because of your history, your experiences, your choices. But you interpret your history through the lens of who you are now. Your current self reaches back to select and interpret memories that confirm your identity. The adult explains the child, but the child creates the adult. Your life story is a predestination paradox. each moment both causing and caused by every other moment. Think about memory for a moment. When you remember something, you're not retrieving a fixed record, but reconstructing an event based on who you are now. Your present self shapes your past, deciding which memories matter, which experiences were formative, which moments defined you. In a very real sense, you're constantly reaching back through time to create the history that created you. This extends to humanity as a whole. We tell stories about our past that shape our future, and our future validates or invalidates those stories, causing us to retell them differently. History isn't just what happened, but what we collectively remember happening, and that memory shapes what will happen. The predestination paradox operates at the level of civilization, cultures bootstrapping themselves into existence through self-fulfilling prophecies. Scientists studying complex systems have discovered something remarkable about how patterns emerge. When systems reach certain critical points, they undergo phase transitions, suddenly reorganizing into new configurations. Water becomes ice, traffic jams form, stock markets crash, civilizations rise and fall. These transitions often seem inevitable in hindsight, as if the future state reached back to organize events leading to it. The pattern completes itself. But perhaps the most profound example of the predestination paradox is consciousness itself. Your brain is constantly predicting what will happen next, creating models of future states and adjusting present behavior to match those predictions. You see a ball flying towards you, and your hand moves to catch it, not based on where the ball is, but where your brain predicts it will be. Your future model shapes your present action. Consciousness might be fundamentally about predestination, about creating futures that then create themselves. Neuroscientists have discovered that your brain makes decisions before you're consciously aware of them. Brain scanners can detect your choice up to 10 seconds before you know you've made it. This suggests that what we experience as choosing is actually becoming aware of choices already made by unconscious processes. The experience of free will might be a story we tell ourselves after the fact, a narrative that makes sense of predestined actions. Yet something rebels against this idea. Even as I explain the predestination paradox, even as logic suggests our choices might be illusions, something insists. I am choosing these words. You are choosing to listen. We are creating this moment together. This resistance itself might be predestined, but it feels real, vital, important. Perhaps the resolution lies not in determining whether free will or predestination is true, but in recognizing that they might be the same thing viewed from different perspectives. From outside time, everything is fixed, a completed story. From within time, the story is being written, each moment genuinely creating the next. Both perspectives are true, like how light is both wave and particle, like how you are both the author and the reader of your life. There's a thought experiment philosophers call the eternal recurrence. Imagine that time is cyclical, that the universe repeats itself exactly, that you will live this exact life infinite times. Every joy, every sorrow, every moment of beauty or boredom, repeated endlessly. Would this change how you live? If you knew you were destined to make the same choices forever, would they still feel like choices? Or would the weight of eternity transform them into something else, something between choice and fate? The predestination paradox suggests that time might be stranger than either a line or a circle. It might be more like a Klein bottle, a shape that passes through itself, where inside becomes outside, where beginning meets end in ways our three-dimensional minds struggle to visualize. In such a universe, causation becomes a Mobius strip, effects creating causes, creating effects, with no clear point where one becomes the other. As you drift towards sleep, consider your dreams. In dreams, time behaves differently. You might experience the effect before the cause, know things before they happen, be simultaneously yourself and someone else. Dreams ignore the rules of linear causation that govern waking life. Perhaps they hint at a deeper reality, where the predestination paradox isn't a paradox at all, but simply how things are. Tomorrow, you'll wake up and make choices. You'll decide what to eat, what to wear, what to say. These choices will feel real, meaningful, yours. And they are, even if they're also inevitable. even if your future self has already lived through them, even if the whole story of your life exists complete somewhere outside time. The predestination paradox doesn't diminish the reality of your experience, but adds a layer of mystery to it. A sense that you're part of something larger, a pattern completing itself through you. In the end, the predestination paradox leaves us with a koan rather than a conclusion. If everything is predestined, then it was predestined that we would believe in free will, that we would experience choice, that we would struggle against fate. The struggle itself is part of the pattern. We are free because we are destined to be free. We choose because we are destined to choose. The paradox dissolves not through resolution, but through acceptance of the mystery. That woman at the train station in 1962 boards the bus and meets her future husband. Their son grows up, invents time travel, and ensures their meeting. The loop closes, perfect and impossible. But within that loop, every moment remains real. Her hesitation at the station, her decision to trust the stranger, the first conversation on the bus, the slowly growing love, the birth of their child, his fascination with time, his incredible invention, his journey back. Each moment exists eternally in the structure of space-time, always happening, always about to happen, always having happened. The predestination paradox whispers that past, present, and future are one, that every moment contains every other moment, that the universe is a vast self-fulfilling prophecy constantly writing itself into existence. And we are both the ink and the pen, the story and the storyteller, the dream and the dreamer, forever creating and created by the endless, beautiful, terrible loop of time. The causal loop paradox. A detective stands over a crime scene, studying the evidence. A broken window, muddy footprints, a note written in handwriting she doesn't recognize, but somehow knows she's seen before. The message is simple: check the basement at midnight. She follows the lead and prevents a disaster, saving dozens of lives. Years later, she discovers time travel exists. On impulse, she journeys back to warn herself about that disaster. She breaks a window to get into the building, leaves muddy footprints, writes a note in her own disguised handwriting. Check the basement at midnight. The crime scene she investigated was the one she created. The clue she followed was the one she left. But if she only knew to leave the warning because she received it, where did the information originally come from? The loop has no beginning, no first cause, just an endless circle of causation, chasing its own tail through time. The causal loop paradox is perhaps the purest expression of time travel's assault on our understanding of cause and effect. It's not about preventing your own existence like the grandfather paradox, or creating information from nothing like the bootstrap paradox, or fulfilling prophecies like predestination. It's about causation itself becoming circular, like a river that flows into itself, a story that tells itself, a thought that thinks itself into being. Imagine you're walking through a forest and come across a perfect circle of mushrooms, what folklore calls a fairy ring. Each mushroom releases spores that help the next mushroom grow, which releases spores for the next, and so on around the circle. But mushrooms die and regenerate, so you can trace the causation back. This mushroom caused that one, which caused the next. With a causal loop in time, there's no such degradation, no generation to point to as the first. The circle exists outside our normal understanding of sequences and origins. I remember reading about a physicist who became obsessed with this paradox. She spent years trying to map out the mathematics of causal loops, filling chalkboards with equations that curved back on themselves. One day, a student asked her, "But where does the loop start?" She laughed and said, "You're asking the wrong question. It's like asking where a circle begins. The loop doesn't start anywhere because it doesn't exist in linear time. It exists as a complete structure, a pattern in space-time that simply is." This connects to one of the deepest questions in philosophy. Why is there something rather than nothing? We usually think everything needs a cause, a reason for existing. But what caused existence itself? Some philosophers suggest that existence might be its own cause, a causal loop at the foundation of reality. The universe exists because it exists, causing itself through a kind of cosmic bootstrap that our linear thinking can barely grasp. Consider how we normally understand causation. A stone drops into a pond, causing ripples. The ripples spread outward, causing lily pads to bob, causing a frog to jump, causing a heron to take flight. It's a chain of causes and effects, each link connected to the next, stretching from past to future. But what if the heron's flight somehow caused the stone to drop? Not metaphorically, but literally, through a loop in time. The chain becomes a circle, and suddenly our questions about first causes become meaningless. The fascinating thing about causal loops is that they don't necessarily violate any laws of physics. The equations of general relativity, Einstein's theory of gravity and spacetime, actually permit what physicists call closed time-like curves. These are paths through spacetime that loop back to their own beginning. An object following such a path would meet its younger self, creating the possibility of causal loops. The physicist Kurt Gödel, famous for his incompleteness theorems in mathematics, found a solution to Einstein's equations that described a rotating universe where causal loops were possible everywhere. But here's where things get truly strange. In a causal loop, information or events exist without origin, yet they're perfectly self-consistent. The loop creates itself, maintains itself, explains itself. It's like a perfect circle drawn without beginning or end, existing complete and whole. Every event in the loop causes and is caused by every other event. The future creates the past, which creates the future, not in sequence, but simultaneously, eternally. Think about your own consciousness for a moment. You're aware of being aware. You think about thinking. This creates a kind of causal loop in your mind. Your thoughts observe themselves, creating the self that observes the thoughts. Consciousness might be the one causal loop we all experience directly, the strange loop of self-awareness that philosophers and neuroscientists struggle to explain. The mind causes itself to exist through the very act of contemplating its existence. Douglas Hofstadter, in his explorations of consciousness and self-reference, suggests that causal loops might be essential to complex systems. When a system becomes sophisticated enough to model itself, to contain a representation of its own processes, it creates these strange loops of causation. The map includes itself, the story contains its own telling, the equation calculates itself. Perhaps causal loops aren't paradoxes to be avoided, but fundamental features of any sufficiently complex reality. There's a beautiful example from computer science that illustrates this. A compiler is a program that translates human-readable code into machine language. But here's the mystery. The compiler itself is a program that needs to be compiled. How do you compile the first compiler? This is called the compiler bootstrap problem. The solution involves a causal loop through time. You write a simple compiler in machine language, use it to compile a better compiler, then use that to compile an even better one, eventually creating a compiler so sophisticated it could have compiled itself from the beginning. The loop closes when the compiler becomes capable of creating itself. This happens in evolution too. DNA contains the instructions for building proteins, but you need proteins to read and replicate DNA. Which came first? Scientists suspect that early life involved RNA, which can both store information and catalyze reactions, creating a causal loop where RNA helps create more RNA. Life itself might have bootstrapped into existence through such loops, effects becoming causes becoming effects, until the system stabilized into self-sustaining existence. The causal loop paradox becomes even more intriguing when we consider quantum mechanics. In the quantum world, particles can be entangled, their properties correlated in ways that seem to transcend normal causation. Measure one particle, and its entangled partner instantly assumes a corresponding state, regardless of the distance between them. It's not that one causes the other to change. Rather, they're part of a single quantum state that exists as a unified whole. Some physicists suggest that causal loops might work similarly, existing as complete structures in space-time rather than sequences of causes and effects. John Wheeler, the physicist who coined the term black hole, proposed something even more radical. He suggested that the entire universe might be a single electron, traveling back and forth through time, weaving every electron and positron that has ever existed. In this view, All electrons are identical because they're the same electron, creating itself through an impossibly complex causal loop that generates all of reality. It's a wild idea, probably wrong, but it illustrates how causal loops might operate on cosmic scales. Consider a more mundane example. You're learning to ride a bicycle. To balance, you need to be moving. But to start moving confidently, you need to be able to balance. It seems like a causal loop. Balance causes movement, causes balance. Of course, in reality, you wobble and fall and gradually improve. But once you've learned, the skill maintains itself through this circular causation. Your body's adjustments cause stability, which allows the adjustments which maintain stability. The loop sustains itself. This happens in economics too. People spend money because they expect the economy to grow. The economy grows because people spend money. Confidence creates the conditions that justify confidence. Fear creates the conditions that justify fear. Markets are full of these causal loops, self-fulfilling prophecies that create the reality they predict. The stock market rises because investors believe it will rise, and their belief, translated into buying pressure, causes the rise they anticipated. Language itself involves causal loops. Words get their meaning from other words, definitions circling back on themselves. Look up any word in the dictionary, then look up the words in its definition, and keep going. Eventually, you'll return to where you started. Meaning exists not in any single word, but in the entire network of relationships. A vast causal loop where every word helps define every other word. But the causal loop paradox in time travel presents something more fundamental. It suggests that causation itself might be more flexible than we imagine. We think of cause and effect as an arrow pointing from past to future. But what if causation is more like a web, with influences running in all directions, including backward through time? What if the future doesn't just emerge from the past, but actively participates in creating it? There's a thought experiment I find particularly compelling. Imagine you receive a message from your future self with instructions for building a time machine. You follow the instructions, build the machine, and eventually send the same message back to your younger self. The information for building the time machine exists in a causal loop. But here's the key. The loop only exists if it's consistent. If the message contained errors, the machine wouldn't work. You couldn't send the message, and the loop would collapse. Only stable, self-consistent loops can exist. This might resolve the paradox. Perhaps the universe only permits causal loops that don't create contradictions. The loops that can exist are those that must exist, perfect circles of causation that maintain their own consistency. It's like a mathematical equation that's only satisfied by certain values. The universe solves for self-consistency, and causal loops are part of the solution. Imagine time as a vast jigsaw puzzle. Most pieces connect in obvious ways, edge to edge, past to future. But some pieces have strange shapes that loop back, connecting to themselves through higher dimensions we can't directly perceive. These are the causal loops, necessary for the puzzle's completion, but defying our expectation that puzzles should be assembled linearly, one piece after another. The human brain might actually create small causal loops in its normal operation. When you anticipate something about to happen, your brain generates a prediction. This prediction influences your perception, making you more likely to notice evidence that confirms it. Your expectation partially creates the reality you expect. Athletes visualize success, and the visualization improves their performance, validating the visualization. The loop closes through the interaction of mind and body, future intentions creating present actions, creating future outcomes. Dreams offer another window into causal loops. In dreams, you might know something is about to happen because it already happened, or remember things that haven't occurred yet. Dream logic ignores linear causation, allowing effects to precede causes, endings to create beginnings. Perhaps dreams show us how consciousness might operate outside the normal flow of time, creating and navigating causal loops that seem paradoxical only from our waking perspective. Even in ordinary life, we experience hints of causal loops. You become friends with someone because you spend time together, and you spend time together because you're friends. You're confident because you succeed, and you succeed because you're confident. You love someone because they love you, and they love you because you love them. These aren't perfect causal loops, they develop over time, but they show how circular causation can create and maintain stable patterns in our lives. The causal loop paradox might be telling us something profound about the nature of existence. Perhaps reality isn't built from a foundation of first causes, but is more like a vast network of mutual causation, everything causing everything else in an intricate dance of interdependence. The Buddhist concept of pratyasamutpada, often translated as dependent origination, suggests something similar. Nothing exists independently. Everything arises through its relationships with everything else. As you lie there in the darkness, feeling your breath rise and fall, consider this. Each breath causes the next, and is caused by the previous one. But where did your first breath come from? It was caused by your birth, which was caused by your parents, reaching back through generations. But your breathing also reaches forward, each breath enabling the next moment of consciousness, the next thought, the next breath. You exist in a causal loop that extends through time, past and future, mutually creating each other through the present moment of your existence. The detective stands at the crime scene she will create years in the future. The broken window, the muddy footprints, the note in her own handwriting that she doesn't yet recognize. She investigates the clues she will leave, follows the trail she will make, prevents the disaster she already prevented. The loop completes itself, perfect and impossible. A circle in time that exists because it exists, explains itself through itself. A mystery that is its own solution. Perhaps that's the deepest truth the causal loop paradox reveals. Existence doesn't need an external cause or a first moment. It can bootstrap itself into being through networks of circular causation that our linear thinking struggles to grasp. The universe causes itself, consciousness creates itself, time loops back to ensure its own consistency. We search for beginnings and endings, for first causes and final effects. But reality might be more like an eternal dance, where every step causes and is caused by every other step, where the dance dances itself into existence. The causal loop paradox doesn't just challenge our understanding of time travel, it challenges our understanding of existence itself. It suggests that the question, what caused it, might sometimes have no answer, not because we lack knowledge, but because the question assumes a linear chain of causation that doesn't always apply. Some things might simply be existing in perfect self-causing loops that need no external explanation or origin. In the silence between thoughts, in the space between cause and effect, perhaps you can sense them. The loops that hold reality together. The circles of causation that create and maintain the patterns of existence. Your next thought will cause the one after that, which will influence the next, which will loop back to affect how you remember this moment, which shapes who you are, which determines your next thought. The circle continues, always beginning, always ending, always complete. Polchinski's paradox. Billiard ball paradox. A billiard ball rolls across a table toward a pocket that happens to be the mouth of a time machine. The trajectory is perfect, the speed precise. In exactly 47 seconds, the ball will enter the pocket and emerge from another pocket 30 seconds in the past. But here's where physics becomes poetry, and simplicity becomes paradox. The ball emerges from that past pocket on a collision course with its younger self. The older ball strikes the younger ball, deflecting it away from the time machine pocket. But if the younger ball never enters the time machine, how can the older ball exist to deflect it? This is Polchinski's paradox, named after the physicist Joseph Polchinski, who proposed it in the 1990s as perhaps the cleanest, most mathematical expression of time travel's fundamental contradiction. Unlike other temporal paradoxes that involve human choices, murdered grandfathers, or mysterious melodies, this one strips everything down to pure physics. Momentum, angles, trajectories. No free will to complicate things, no consciousness to muddy the waters. Just Newton's laws playing out on a felt table with pockets that pierce through time itself. I find something beautifully honest about this paradox. It removes all the human drama and asks the universe a simple question. Can you contradict yourself? Can effect prevent cause? Can the future reach back and erase its own origin? The billiard ball doesn't choose its path, doesn't agonize over paradoxes. It simply follows the laws of physics, and those laws seem to tie themselves in an impossible knot. Polchinski developed this thought experiment while working on quantum gravity and string theory. He wanted to understand whether the laws of physics themselves would prevent time travel, or whether they could accommodate these strange loops of causation. The billiard ball became his perfect test subject, an object simple enough to analyze mathematically, but complex enough to generate genuine paradoxes. Picture the scene more carefully. The table is perfectly smooth, no friction to complicate calculations. The ball is perfectly spherical, its surface uniform. We know its exact mass, position, and velocity. We can calculate precisely when it will reach the pocket, at what angle it will enter, how it will emerge in the past. This isn't fuzzy philosophy, but hard mathematics. And the mathematics seems to say, this is impossible. But here's where things get interesting. When physicists actually worked through the equations, they discovered something unexpected. While the paradoxical trajectory exists, where the ball prevents itself from entering the time machine, there are also self-consistent trajectories. The older ball could emerge at a slightly different angle, giving its younger self a glancing blow that changes its path, but doesn't prevent it from entering the time machine. The blow ensures the older ball emerges at exactly the right angle to deliver that same glancing blow. The loop closes consistently. In fact, physicists found not just one self-consistent solution, but infinite solutions. The ball could graze its younger self lightly, or hit it harder. It could strike from the left or the right. Each consistent solution creates a perfect loop where the older ball's intervention ensures its own existence. It's as if the universe offers infinite ways to avoid paradox while still allowing the strange loops of time travel. This connects to something profound in physics called the principle of least action. Nature, it seems, is lazy in the most elegant way possible. Light takes the fastest path between points. Objects fall along trajectories that minimize action, a quantity related to energy and time. The universe solves complex equations automatically, finding paths that satisfy all constraints. Perhaps temporal consistency is just another constraint, and the universe naturally finds trajectories that avoid paradox. Think about water flowing down a hillside. It doesn't calculate the optimal path, doesn't solve differential equations. It simply flows, and in flowing, finds the path of least resistance. Every droplet influences every other droplet, creating rivulets, streams, rivers. The water solves the problem of descent through the simple act of descending. Perhaps time-traveling billiard balls would behave similarly, naturally finding self-consistent paths through space-time. But Polchinski's paradox raises a deeper question. Who or what chooses among the infinite self-consistent solutions? If a ball can emerge at various angles, all creating valid loops, what determines which actually occurs? This is where quantum mechanics enters the picture with its fundamental randomness. Perhaps all consistent histories occur in parallel quantum branches, or perhaps quantum uncertainty selects randomly among the valid options. Igor Novikov and his colleagues proposed what they called the principle of self-consistency. The only trajectories that can occur are those that don't create paradoxes. It's not that the universe actively prevents paradoxes, but that paradoxical situations simply cannot exist like logical contradictions. You can write the words square circle, but you cannot draw one. Similarly, you can describe a paradoxical trajectory, but it cannot physically occur. This principle has a beautiful mathematical expression. In classical mechanics, we can usually specify initial conditions, position, and velocity, and calculate exactly what happens next. But with closed time-like curves, time travel loops, we must solve what mathematicians call a boundary value problem. We need trajectories that match up consistently when they loop back on themselves. Only certain solutions satisfy these constraints, naturally eliminating paradoxes. Consider an analogy from music. When you tune a guitar string, you're finding frequencies where the wave reinforces itself, where the vibration traveling down the string arrives back at the starting point in phase with itself. These are the resonant frequencies, the notes that ring clear and true. Other frequencies create destructive interference, canceling themselves out. Perhaps self-consistent time travel trajectories are like resonant frequencies in space-time, patterns that reinforce rather than contradict themselves. The billiard ball paradox also illuminates something curious about information and entropy. The second law of thermodynamics says entropy always increases. Things naturally become more disordered over time. But a billiard ball emerging from the past seems to violate this. It appears from nowhere, adding information to the universe. Where does this information come from? How does the universe maintain its accounting? One possibility is that time travel requires a kind of information exchange. The ball entering the future pocket must exactly match the ball emerging from the past pocket. Same mass, same temperature, same quantum state. This creates a constraint that might naturally select the unique self-consistent trajectory. The universe maintains its books by ensuring perfect correspondence between what enters and what emerges from the time loop. There's something almost musical about this correspondence. Imagine a fugue where a melody chases itself through time, each voice entering at precisely the right moment to harmonize with itself. The mathematical beauty of self-consistent trajectories has this same quality, patterns that create themselves through their own perfect timing. Scientists have actually conducted experiments that capture something of Polchinski's paradox, though without actual time travel. They use light pulses in carefully arranged fiber optic loops, where the output can influence the input. The light doesn't travel backward in time, but the experimental setup creates similar logical structures. And consistently, they find that the system naturally evolves towards self-consistent solutions, avoiding paradoxes through what seems like an inherent wisdom in the physics itself. This brings us to a fascinating possibility. What if the universe is fundamentally computational, constantly solving equations to maintain consistency? Every particle interaction, every quantum event might be part of a vast calculation, ensuring that causality remains intact even when it loops back on itself. The billiard ball finds its consistent trajectory because that's the only solution to the universe's equations. But there's another interpretation that's even stranger. Some physicists suggest that the presence of closed time-like curves might change the nature of physical law itself. Near a time machine, the usual rules of cause and effect might blur into something more complex. The billiard ball wouldn't simply follow Newton's laws, but would be guided by a deeper principle that encompasses both normal causation and temporal loops. Think about how gravity warps space around a massive object. Light still travels in straight lines from its perspective, but those lines curve through warped space. Perhaps time machines create a similar warping in causality itself. Effects still follow causes from a local perspective, but the causal structure curves back on itself, creating loops that seem paradoxical only from our limited viewpoint. Kip Thorne, the physicist who helped develop the theory of traversable wormholes, studied Polchinski's paradox extensively. He and his students found that quantum effects might be crucial. At the quantum level, particles don't have definite trajectories, but exist in superpositions of many paths. A quantum billiard ball would simultaneously take all possible paths, and only the self-consistent ones would reinforce through quantum interference. This quantum resolution has an elegant feature. It automatically selects not just any self-consistent solution, but the most probable one. The trajectories that barely graze, that create the minimal disturbance, would be quantum mechanically favored over violent collisions. The universe, it seems, prefers gentle consistency over dramatic intervention. There's a profound philosophical implication here. If physical laws naturally prevent paradoxes, if consistency is built into the fabric of reality, then perhaps the universe is more robust than we imagined. Time travel might not threaten causality, but reveal its deeper structure. The grandfather paradox, the bootstrap paradox, Polchinski's paradox, these might not be bugs in the universe's operating system, but features that demonstrate its sophisticated error correction mechanisms. As you contemplate this, imagine you're watching a game of billiards where every shot is perfect, where every angle is calculated, where the balls dance in patterns that seem choreographed. Now imagine one pocket leads to the past. The game becomes infinitely more complex, but perhaps not impossible. The players would need to account not just for where balls are going, but where they've been. not just for current collisions, but for future past interactions. This is what Polchinski's paradox teaches us. Time travel doesn't necessarily break physics, but might reveal physics we haven't yet understood. The simple billiard ball, following its simple trajectory, becomes a probe into the deepest mysteries of time, causality, and existence. Its path across the table traces questions about free will, determinism, and the nature of physical law itself. The paradox also suggests something beautiful about constraint and creativity. When the ball must create a self-consistent loop, it doesn't have infinite freedom. But within the constraints, infinite solutions exist. It's like a sonnet. 14 lines, specific meter, particular rhyme scheme, yet infinite poems are possible. The universe might be similarly constrained by consistency, yet infinitely creative in its solutions. Consider how this applies beyond billiard balls. Every particle in the universe follows trajectories through space-time. If time travel is possible, each particle must find its self-consistent path, creating a cosmic dance of incredible complexity. Yet physics suggests this dance might naturally organize itself, each particle finding its place in the grand pattern without paradox or contradiction. The billiard ball rolls toward the pocket, toward its journey through time, toward its meeting with itself. Will it deflect itself away, creating paradox? Will it graze itself gently, ensuring consistency? Or will quantum mechanics blur its trajectory into all possibilities simultaneously, letting the universe choose the path that maintains the integrity of cause and effect? Polchinski's paradox strips time travel to its mathematical bones, removing human agency and emotion to reveal the pure logical structure beneath. And what it reveals is both troubling and beautiful. A universe that might permit loops in time, but not loops in logic, that allows effects to precede causes but not contradictions to exist, that bends the rules of sequence while maintaining the deeper law of consistency. In the end, the billiard ball completes its journey, emerging in the past to meet itself, creating the very trajectory that led to its time travel. The paradox resolves not through divine intervention or conscious choice, but through the simple elegance of physical law finding its own solution. The ball doesn't know it's avoiding paradox. It simply rolls, following forces and trajectories, tracing out the only path that can exist, the one that does exist. The table is quiet now, the ball at rest, but the implications of its journey continue to ripple through our understanding of time, causality, and the deep structure of reality. Polchinski's paradox reminds us that even the simplest objects, following the simplest laws, can reveal complexities that challenge our most fundamental assumptions about how the universe works. And perhaps that's the most profound paradox of all, that simplicity itself can generate such beautiful complexity when time curves back upon itself. The butterfly effect paradox. A meteorologist in 1972 sits at his computer, running weather simulations. Edward Lorenz enters a number, 0.506127. But he's in a hurry, so he rounds it, 0.506, 3 decimal places instead of 6. Such a tiny difference, less than 0.1%. He expects the weather pattern to develop almost identically. Instead, after just a few simulated days, the entire system diverges. Where his original simulation showed sunshine, this one shows storms. Where there were gentle breezes, now hurricanes form. This discovery will revolutionize our understanding of complex systems, birthing chaos theory and giving us the metaphor of the butterfly. A butterfly flapping its wings in Brazil, causing a tornado in Texas weeks later. Now add time travel to this sensitive dependence on initial conditions, and you have the butterfly effect paradox. Step out of your time machine in the past and you displace air molecules. Those molecules bump into others, which bump into still others. The disturbance spreads, amplifies, cascades through the complex system of Earth's atmosphere, its ecosystems, its human societies. By the time you return to your present, everything has changed. Not because you shot your grandfather or gave Shakespeare Hamlet, but simply because you existed in a time where you weren't supposed to exist, adding your butterfly wings to the storm of causation. This paradox differs fundamentally from the others we've explored. The grandfather paradox deals with logical contradiction. The bootstrap paradox questions the origin of information. Polchinski's paradox examines physical self-consistency. But the butterfly effect paradox confronts us with something perhaps more unsettling: the practical impossibility of controlling consequences in complex systems. Even if time travel violates no logical or physical laws, it might still be unusable because every trip would spiral into unintended and unpredictable changes. I think about this whenever I make a seemingly trivial decision. Should I take the stairs or the elevator? Leave 5 minutes earlier or later? Send that email now or wait until tomorrow? In a linear timeline, these choices seem insignificant. But if someone from the future were observing, they might see how my elevator ride delays someone else by 30 seconds, causing them to miss meeting a future business partner, preventing a company from forming, changing the entire economic landscape of the next century. Every trivial action becomes momentous when viewed through the lens of chaos theory. Consider what physicists call sensitive dependence on initial conditions. It's not just that small changes have small effects that accumulate into large ones. It's that the effects amplify exponentially. In chaotic systems, and our world is full of them, differences grow rapidly until the system's entire evolution changes. Weather is the classic example, but it applies to ecosystems, economies, epidemics, even individual human lives. A young woman in 1905 drops a handkerchief while crossing a street in Vienna. A young man picks it up. They exchange smiles, eventually marry. Their grandson becomes a key figure in the Cold War. Now imagine a time traveler appears on that street corner, startling the woman so she grips her handkerchief tighter. It doesn't fall. They never meet. History unfolds completely differently. No dramatic intervention, no paradox, just the butterfly effect rippling through generations. Ray Bradbury captured this beautifully in his story, A Sound of Thunder, where time travelers hunting dinosaurs are warned to stay on a designated path to minimize their impact. One hunter steps off the path and crushes a butterfly. When they return to their present, everything is subtly different. Spelling has changed, a different president was elected, the entire feel of civilization has shifted. All from one butterfly 65 million years ago. But here's what makes this paradox particularly fascinating. It might be impossible to avoid. Unlike the grandfather paradox, which you could simply choose not to create by not killing your grandfather, the butterfly effect happens automatically. Your mere presence in the past, the gravitational effect of your mass, the heat radiating from your body, the bacteria you carry, the carbon dioxide you exhale, all of it introduces changes that will amplify over time. Scientists studying chaos have discovered something called the Lyapunov time, after the Russian mathematician Alexander Lyapunov. It's the timescale over which a system becomes unpredictable. For weather, it's about 2 weeks. For the solar system, it's millions of years. For human society, with its complex interactions and feedback loops, it might be measured in days or even hours. Travel back beyond the Lyapunov time, and prediction becomes impossible. The butterfly has flapped its wings, and the hurricane is inevitable, though you cannot say where or when it will strike. This connects to a profound limitation in physics. Even if we knew the position and velocity of every particle in the universe, even if we had infinite computational power, we still couldn't predict the future perfectly. Not because of quantum uncertainty, though that adds another layer of complexity, but because of chaos itself. Some systems are irreducibly unpredictable, their futures contingent on details smaller than any measurement could capture. Think about human history as a chaotic system. World War I started because Archduke Franz Ferdinand's driver took a wrong turn, stopping the car in front of the one cafe where assassin Gavrilo Princip happened to be eating a sandwich. If the driver had known the route better, if Princip had chosen a different cafe, if any of 1,000 tiny details had been different, the 20th century might have unfolded completely differently. History balances on such knife edges, where the smallest push sends it tumbling in a new direction. Now imagine you're a time traveler trying to prevent World War I. You could stop that assassination, but the tensions that created the opportunity would remain. Perhaps war breaks out a month later over a different incident. Or perhaps, without that particular war at that particular time, tensions build until they explode in an even more devastating conflict with more advanced weapons. The butterfly effect means you cannot simply change one thing. You change everything, and the final result might be worse than what you tried to prevent. This brings us to an interesting question about information and entropy. In thermodynamics, entropy always increases. Systems become more disordered over time. But life, intelligence, and civilization seem to create local decreases in entropy, islands of order in an increasingly chaotic universe. When a time traveler introduces information from the future into the past, they're potentially disrupting this delicate balance. The butterfly effect might be entropy's way of reasserting itself, ensuring that attempts to impose order from outside the normal flow of time generate even more chaos. Some theorists have proposed that the butterfly effect might actually protect causality rather than threaten it. If every trip to the past scrambles history beyond recognition, then stable time loops become impossible. You couldn't go back and become your own grandfather, because the butterfly effect would ensure that the timeline changes so dramatically that you're never born, not from paradox, but from sheer chaos. The butterfly effect becomes a kind of cosmic defense mechanism against temporal paradoxes. But there's another possibility that's even more intriguing. What if the butterfly effect in time travel is self-limiting? Complex systems often have what scientists call attractors, stable states toward which the system naturally evolves. Despite the chaos, despite the sensitivity to initial conditions, the system might still end up in roughly the same place. History might have a kind of momentum, a tendency to flow towards certain outcomes regardless of small perturbations. Consider evolution. If we could restart life on Earth, would it evolve the same way? Every random mutation would be different. Every extinction event might affect different species. Yet some scientists argue that certain features, eyes, wings, intelligence, might be so advantageous that they would evolve again, perhaps in different forms but serving the same functions. Evolution might be chaotic in its details, but predictable in its broad patterns. The same might be true for human history. Perhaps certain inventions, discoveries, and social developments are inevitable once the conditions are right. If you prevented Einstein from developing relativity, perhaps someone else would discover it a few years later. If you stopped the American Revolution, perhaps democratic ideals would emerge elsewhere. The butterfly might flap its wings, but the storm still comes. Only the details change. This idea of historical momentum, or temporal inertia, appears in many time travel stories. The timeline resists change, finding ways to maintain its general shape even as details shift. It's like a river that, when blocked, finds a new path but still reaches the sea. The butterfly effect operates on the surface, creating ripples and eddies, but deeper currents maintain their course. Quantum mechanics adds another layer to this paradox. At the quantum level, events are probabilistic rather than deterministic. An electron doesn't have a definite position until measured. A radioactive atom doesn't have a definite decay time until it decays. This fundamental randomness means that even without chaos, the future isn't fully determined by the past. The butterfly effect might amplify quantum uncertainties until they reshape macroscopic reality. Some physicists have suggested that quantum mechanics might actually smooth out the butterfly effect in time travel scenarios. In the many worlds interpretation, every quantum event branches the universe. A time traveler wouldn't change the past, but would create a new branch of reality. The butterfly effect would generate countless new timelines, each slightly different, but the original timeline would remain intact. The chaos is contained by constantly proliferating realities. But perhaps the most profound aspect of the butterfly effect paradox is what it reveals about the nature of causation itself. We like to think of cause and effect as simple, linear relationships. This causes that, which causes the next thing. But in complex systems, causation becomes a web where everything influences everything else. The butterfly doesn't really cause the tornado. It's one of billions of contributing factors that, through their complex interaction, produce the storm. When you add time travel to this web of causation, it becomes even more tangled. Effects can precede causes, loops can form, and the entire notion of what caused what begins to break down. The butterfly effect paradox shows us that even if we could travel through time, we might never be able to understand or control the consequences of our actions. Every trip would be a leap into chaos. As you lie there contemplating this paradox, consider your own life as a complex system sensitive to initial conditions. Think about the tiny chances that led to your existence. Your parents' meeting, the particular sperm and egg that created you, the countless near misses with accident or disease that could have prevented you from reaching this moment. You are the product of billions of butterflies flapping their wings throughout history. And you are yourself a butterfly. Every choice you make, every action you take, sends ripples through the complex system of human society. Most of these ripples die out, dampened by the system's stability. But some might amplify, especially when they resonate with other ripples, creating unexpected storms in places and times you'll never know about. You are constantly changing the future in ways you cannot predict or control. This might seem to make life meaningless. If we cannot predict or control the consequences of our actions, why act at all? But I think the butterfly effect paradox teaches us something different. It shows us that we are all connected through the complex web of causation, that every action matters even if we cannot trace its effects, that we are participants in a dance of complexity that creates beauty and meaning through its very unpredictability. The time traveler steps out of their machine into the past, trying to step carefully, trying not to disturb anything, but their very presence is a disturbance. Air molecules scatter from their arrival, thermal radiation spreads from their body, gravitational waves ripple from their mass. They breathe, and atmospheric composition shifts infinitesimally. They walk, and the Earth's rotation slows by an immeasurable amount. They exist, and existence is enough to change everything. By the time they return to their own era, assuming they can return at all, the world has transformed. Not dramatically perhaps, but pervasively. Different people exist, different ideas have emerged, different problems face humanity. The timeline hasn't been broken, or paradoxically looped, but simply changed, evolved differently, become something other than what it was. The butterfly has flapped its wings, and history has responded with a different dance. The butterfly effect paradox suggests that time travel, even if physically possible, might be practically useless for changing specific events. You cannot simply go back and fix mistakes, prevent tragedies, or improve outcomes, because the chaos you introduce might create worse problems than those you solve. Every solution becomes a new problem, every intervention spawns unexpected consequences. Every butterfly creates storms you never intended. Yet, perhaps this isn't a flaw, but a feature. Perhaps the butterfly effect protects the timeline not through paradox or consistency, but through sheer complexity. It ensures that no single agent, no matter how powerful or knowledgeable, can control history. The past remains effectively unchangeable, not because it's fixed, but because it's too sensitive, too complex, too chaotic to manipulate precisely. The butterfly effect becomes time's way of preserving its own mystery. In the end, the butterfly effect paradox leaves us not with impossibility, but with humility. It reminds us that we live in a universe of stunning complexity, where simple causes create complex effects, where prediction has limits, where every action participates in a vast dance of consequence we can never fully comprehend. We are all butterflies in the storm of time, our wings beating out rhythms that will echo through eternity in ways we cannot imagine. Tomorrow, you will make countless small decisions. You'll choose when to wake up, what to wear, which route to take, whom to talk to, what to say. Each choice will send ripples through the complex system of reality. Most will fade away, but some might amplify, combining with other ripples to create unexpected waves of change. You cannot know which choices will matter, which butterflies will create storms. All you can do is act with intention and compassion, knowing that your wings are part of the vast, beautiful, chaotic dance of existence. The butterfly flaps its wings in Brazil. Molecules of air begin their journey, bumping and swirling, rising and falling, joining with other currents, building into winds, organizing into storms. Weeks later, a tornado touches down in Texas. No one can trace it back to that original butterfly, lost in the chaos of a complex world. But the connection exists, invisible and undeniable, a thread in the vast web of causation that connects all things across space and time. This is the butterfly effect paradox. Not that small things don't matter, but that they matter too much for us to ever fully understand how or why. The time traveler's meeting paradox. Picture a small cafe in Vienna, November 15th, 2055. It's unremarkable except for one thing. Today, 17 people will walk through its doors, order coffee, and sit at various tables, each trying not to stare at the others. They range in age from 25 to 70, but they all share the same scar on their left hand, the same way of stirring sugar counterclockwise, the same nervous habit of tapping their ring finger twice before lifting their cup. They are all the same person, travelers from different points along one timeline, and they've all come here for the same reason. They remember being here, meeting themselves on this exact date. The youngest version, let's call them Riley 25, sits in the corner, overwhelmed. They invented time travel just yesterday, and their first test brought them here to this mandatory appointment with their future selves. Riley 30 watches them with sympathy, remembering that confusion. Riley 40 makes notes in a journal, documenting what they recall from when they were Riley 30, trying to spot differences, discrepancies, changes in the timeline. Riley 60 seems tired, having made this journey many times, knowing they still have years of returns ahead. And eldest Riley 70 sits by the window, serene, knowing this is their last visit to this temporal crossroads. This is the time traveler's meeting paradox, perhaps the strangest of all temporal puzzles, because it multiplies the paradoxes by the number of selves present. Each version must be here, because they remember being here. But who organized the first meeting? If Riley 25 is here because they remember being here as Riley 30, and Riley 30 is here because they remember being here as Riley 40, the chain of memory curves back on itself like an Ouroboros swallowing its own tail. The paradox deepens when you consider what they might discuss. Riley 25 wants to know about the future, but anything the older versions say will change that future. Riley 40 might warn about a mistake that Riley 35 is about to make, but if the warning is heeded, then Riley 40 never experienced the mistake, so how can they warn about it? Each conversation threatens to unravel the timeline that brought them all here. I imagine the conversations that must happen in that cafe. The older versions remember having these exact conversations when they were younger. They remember what they heard, what shocked them, what comforted them. Now they must speak those same words, play their part in the temporal script. But do they have a choice? Can Riley 50 decide to say something different than what they remember hearing when they were Riley 25? And if they do, what happens to the 25 years of history between those 2 points? This paradox extends beyond the individual to encompass the entire nature of identity across time. Are these 17 people the same person or different people? They share memories up to Riley 25's present, but from there, their histories diverge. Riley 30 has lived 5 years that Riley 25 hasn't experienced yet. Those years have changed them, shaped them, perhaps fundamentally altered who they are. Yet they all identify as the same person, claim the same past, will live the same future. The philosopher Derek Parfit would have been fascinated by this scenario. He argued that personal identity is not what matters. What matters is psychological continuity and connectedness. These 17 Rileys are psychologically continuous, each remembering being the younger versions. But they're also distinct, each shaped by experiences the others haven't had yet or can't remember anymore. They are both one and many, same and different, united and divided by time itself. Consider the practical challenges of such a meeting. Who speaks first? Do they take turns by age? Does Riley 70 have authority over the others by virtue of experience? Or does Riley 25 have special status as the version living in the present? If they vote on something, does each get one vote? Or are they collectively one person with one vote? The meeting becomes a microcosm of every philosophical puzzle about identity, democracy, and temporal authority. There's something particularly poignant about the middle-aged versions. Riley 45 sits between youth and age, remembering being young, anticipating being old, caught in the temporal middle. They look at Riley 25 with nostalgia and at Riley 70 with trepidation. They are living proof to their younger self that life continues, and living proof to their older self that life was once different. They embody the journey that connects all 17 versions. But here's where the paradox becomes truly mind-bending. Each version's memories include this meeting, but from different perspectives. Riley 30 remembers being Riley 25 and meeting 16 older selves. But they also remember being Riley 26 and meeting 16 selves, being Riley 27 and meeting 16 selves, and so on. Their memory contains multiple versions of this same event, each from a slightly different age's perspective. The meeting isn't a single event, but a palimpsest of overlapping experiences. This creates what we might call temporal vertigo. Imagine trying to remember something that you've experienced from 17 different perspectives across 45 years. Which memory is the real one? The fresh, immediate experience of Riley 25? The fading, possibly distorted memory of Riley 70? Or some aggregate of all 17 viewpoints? The meeting exists not as a single moment, but as a smeared experience across decades of subjective time. The paradox becomes even stranger when we consider knowledge and information. Riley 25 knows only what they've lived through. Riley 70 knows the entire life story. But that knowledge is precisely what they cannot fully share. If Riley 70 tells Riley 25 everything that will happen, those events might not happen, which means Riley 70's knowledge would be false. But if it's false, why should Riley 25 believe anything they say? The meeting becomes an exercise in calibrated revelation, each version saying exactly enough to preserve the timeline while fulfilling their remembered role. Think about the emotional complexity of such a gathering. Riley 25 might be full of dreams and ambitions. Riley 35 knows which dreams failed, but hasn't given up hope. Riley 50 has made peace with disappointments, but found unexpected joys. Riley 65 looks back with acceptance and forward with uncertainty. Each version carries the emotional weight of their years, and all those emotions exist simultaneously in that small cafe. The meeting also raises questions about responsibility and regret. If Riley 40 deeply regrets a decision they made at 35, can they warn Riley 34? Should they? If they prevent their younger self's mistake, do they erase 5 years of growth and learning that came from that mistake? Every version becomes responsible not just for their own choices, but for maintaining the choices of all other versions. This connects to a deeper paradox about knowledge and experience. We often wish we could go back with the knowledge we have now, make better choices, avoid mistakes. But the knowledge comes from the mistakes. Riley 60's wisdom exists because of Riley 30's foolishness. To prevent the foolishness would be to prevent the wisdom, creating a kind of experiential paradox where learning prevents itself. Some physicists have proposed that such meetings might be impossible, not because of logical paradox, but because of what they call the chronology protection conjecture. The universe might have mechanisms that prevent time travelers from meeting themselves, not through physical barriers, but through probability itself. Every attempt to arrange such a meeting might fail through increasingly unlikely coincidences, the universe conspiring to prevent temporal awkwardness. But let's imagine the meeting proceeds. They've all ordered their coffee, the same way they always order it, will order it, have ordered it. They begin to talk, carefully, each remembering this conversation from multiple angles. Riley 25 asks about love, and several versions exchange glances, knowing what's coming but unable to prevent it. Riley 40 asks about a decision they're facing, though they already know what they'll choose because Riley 41 is sitting right there, proof of the choice made. The conversation would be like a carefully choreographed dance, where everyone knows the steps, but must pretend to spontaneity. Each version would speak words they remember hearing, react with surprise they remember feeling, even though they also remember speaking those same words as an older version. It's performance and authenticity simultaneously, each Riley being genuinely themselves while playing a role in their own history. As the meeting progresses, subtle differences might emerge. Maybe Riley 55's coffee cup has a chip that Riley 54 doesn't remember. Maybe Riley 33 has a grey hair that appeared earlier than Riley 40 recalls. These tiny divergences could signal that the timeline isn't as fixed as they thought, that each journey through time creates small changes, that they're not all from exactly the same timeline, but from slightly different quantum branches. This possibility transforms the meeting from a paradox into something even stranger, a confluence of similar but distinct timelines. Each Riley would be meeting not their exact past and future selves, but close variations, versions whose lives diverged in tiny ways through the butterfly effects of time travel. The meeting becomes less about one person across time and more about the multiverse of possibilities that spring from each moment. The emotional weight of such a realization would be staggering. Riley 25 isn't looking at their inevitable future, but at one possible future. Riley 70 isn't remembering their actual past, but one version of it. Each Riley becomes both more and less than they seemed, representatives of possibility rather than certainty. The meeting transforms from prophecy to probability, from fate to quantum superposition. As the afternoon wears on, the Rileys would need to confront the ultimate question: why are they really here? Is it just because they remember being here, a causal loop with no beginning? Or is there something deeper, some message that needs to be passed through time, some wisdom that can only be communicated through this strange temporal gathering? Perhaps the message is the meeting itself. By seeing themselves across time, each Riley gains perspective that no normal person could have. They see that life continues, that current problems pass, that new joys await, that aging brings both loss and wisdom. They see themselves with a compassion usually reserved for others, understanding their younger self's fears and their older self's regrets with equal empathy. The meeting might serve as a kind of temporal therapy, each version helping the others simply by existing. Riley 25's enthusiasm reminds the older versions of dreams they've forgotten. Riley 70's serenity shows the younger versions that peace is possible. The middle-aged Rileys bridge the gap, translating between the languages of youth and age, hope and experience. But there's also a profound loneliness in such a meeting. Each Riley is surrounded by themselves, yet entirely alone. They cannot truly connect with anyone here because everyone is them. They know every story, share every memory up to a point, will live every future being described. The meeting is simultaneously the most intimate and most isolated gathering possible. As the day grows late, the Rileys begin to leave. They must return to their own times, resume their lives, move toward or away from this moment. Riley 25 leaves first, overwhelmed, needing to process what they've seen. Riley 70 leaves last, taking one final look at their younger selves, perhaps wondering if this really is the last time, or if there's an Riley 75 somewhere who simply hasn't arrived yet. The cafe empties except for one figure, Riley 50, let's say, sitting alone, caught precisely in the middle of the journey. They remember being half the people who just left and will become the other half. They sit at the temporal center of their own existence, the fulcrum on which past and future balance. In this moment, they are most fully themselves, containing all the Rileys who were and will be. They finish their coffee, leave money on the table, probably the exact amount they remember leaving, will leave, have always left. They walk out into the Vienna evening, knowing they'll return, have returned, are returning even now in other versions of themselves. The meeting ends and continues, has always ended and never ended. A temporal knot that exists outside normal causation. The time traveler's meeting paradox shows us that identity itself might be more fluid than we imagine. We think of ourselves as continuous beings moving through time, but perhaps we're more like a series of connected moments, each complete in itself, creating the illusion of continuity through memory and anticipation. The meeting of 17 Rileys doesn't reveal one person, but 17 people who share a special relationship, connected by memory and destiny, but distinct in their moment of existence. As you drift toward sleep, consider this. Even without time travel, you meet your past and future selves every night in memory and imagination. You recall who you were, envision who you'll be, hold conversations across time in the theater of your mind. The child you were, the elder you might become. They're all present in this moment, meeting in the Cafe of Consciousness, sharing the strange burden and gift of being you. Tomorrow, you'll wake up one day older, having traveled through time at the standard rate of 1 second per second. You'll be slightly different than you are now, shaped by the dreams you're about to have. The rest your body is taking, the countless small changes that accumulate with each passing moment. You are already in a constant meeting with your past and future selves, negotiating identity across the strange territory of time. The Rileys in their Vienna cafe are just an extreme version of what we all experience. The paradox of being both continuous and changing, same and different, one person and many people spread across time. They show us that identity isn't a thing, but a process, not a noun, but a verb, not a being but a becoming, that never quite arrives at a final destination. The cafe in Vienna waits, November 15th, 2055, for a meeting that must happen because it has happened, will happen, is happening right now, in the eternal present of a story that tells itself. 17 people who are one person who is 17 people, a paradox that multiplies with each telling, each remembering, each return to that necessary, impossible gathering of selves across time. The information loop paradox. A historian in 2140 discovers something extraordinary in the archives. A detailed account of a conversation that hasn't happened yet. According to the document, tomorrow at 3:47 p.m., she will discuss the origins of the Third Renaissance with a stranger in the university library. The transcript is perfect, every word, every pause, even noting when she'll knock over her coffee cup at 4:13. Disturbed but curious, she goes to the library at the appointed time. The stranger appears exactly on schedule. They have the conversation, word for word as written, including her futile attempts to deviate from the script. She knocks over the coffee at 4:13. The stranger leaves at 4:25, just as documented. Later, she discovers that she herself will travel back in time in 30 years and place this document in the archives. The conversation was predetermined because she read about it, and she read about it because she will document it. But where did the information originally come from? Who first knew what would be said? This is the information loop paradox, perhaps the most subtle and profound of all temporal mysteries. Unlike physical objects that age or decay, information seems capable of existing in perfect closed loops through time, self-creating and self-sustaining, neither generated nor destroyed, but simply existing, hanging in the causal void like a message without an author. Information has peculiar properties that make it uniquely suited to temporal paradoxes. It has no mass, no physical substance that degrades with time. You can copy it perfectly without depleting the original. It can exist in countless forms. Written words, magnetic patterns, neural connections, quantum states, while remaining essentially the same. When information travels through time, it carries no entropy debt, bears no wear from its journey. It arrives in the past as fresh as when it left the future. Consider what happens in our historian's case more carefully. The document contains not just words, but knowledge, historical analysis, linguistic patterns, conceptual frameworks that won't be developed for decades. This information shapes her thinking, influences her research, becomes part of the intellectual foundation that will eventually lead her to write the very document she read. The ideas create themselves through a temporal loop that has no beginning, no moment of genuine creation or discovery. I think about this whenever I encounter a truly original idea. Where do insights come from? Sometimes they seem to arrive fully formed, as if plucked from some realm beyond normal thought. Mathematicians describe theorems appearing in dreams. Scientists report sudden intuitions that solve problems they've struggled with for years. Artists speak of being channels for creativity that flows through them, rather than from them. What if some of these inspirations are information loops? Knowledge that exists because it will exist. Ideas that create themselves through the strange mechanics of time. The information loop paradox becomes even stranger when you consider that information isn't passive. It acts. The historian reads the document and it changes her behavior. She goes to the library because the document says she will. She has the conversation because she knows she must. The information doesn't just describe events, it causes them. It reaches out from its loop to shape reality, making itself true through the very act of being known. This connects to something physicists call the participatory universe, the idea that observation and information play fundamental roles in creating reality. In quantum mechanics, particles don't have definite properties until measured. The act of gaining information about a system changes that system. Perhaps information loops are an extreme version of this principle, where information doesn't just influence reality, but bootstraps itself into existence through closed causal chains. Think about DNA for a moment. It's information encoded in molecular form, instructions for building organisms that can read and replicate DNA. The information creates the machinery that processes the information. Life itself is a kind of information loop, though one that operates through reproduction rather than time travel. The temporal version might be no stranger than what's already happening in every living cell. The paradox deepens when you consider the nature of meaning. Information isn't just patterns. It requires interpretation, context, understanding. The words in the historian's document only have meaning because she can read them, but she can only read them because her culture developed language, writing, the specific concepts being discussed. The information loop must include not just the data, but the entire framework for understanding it. The loop creates its own context, its own conditions for meaningfulness. Let me share a thought experiment that haunts me. Imagine you receive a message from your future self containing instructions for building a device. The message says, this device will revolutionize human civilization, end suffering, unlock the secrets of the universe. You build it, and it works exactly as described. Years later, you realize you must send the instructions back to your younger self to complete the loop. But you never actually invented anything. You just followed instructions that came from nowhere, that exist only because they exist. Are you an inventor, or merely a conduit for information that invents itself? This scenario raises profound questions about creativity and free will. If the information for humanity's greatest achievements could come from temporal loops rather than human ingenuity, what does that say about progress, about innovation, about the nature of discovery itself? Perhaps every breakthrough is just information finally finding the right loop to manifest itself through. The information loop paradox also challenges our understanding of truth. We usually think something is true because it corresponds to reality. But in these loops, information becomes true by making itself true. The historian's document is accurate because reading it causes the events it describes. Truth becomes not a relationship between statements and facts, but a self-fulfilling prophecy that validates itself through circular causation. Consider how this might apply to larger scales. What if entire scientific theories, philosophical systems, even religions are information loops? They exist because they will inspire someone to travel back and introduce them at the right moment in history. The ideas spread, develop, eventually lead to time travel, which enables someone to ensure the idea's own origins. Whole worldviews could bootstrap themselves into existence, creating their own theological or theoretical foundations through temporal recursion. The mathematician Kurt Gödel, who we mentioned earlier in connection with rotating universes, also proved something remarkable about formal systems. Any sufficiently complex logical system contains statements that cannot be proven within that system. These are true but unprovable, existing in a kind of logical loop where their truth depends on factors outside the system. Perhaps temporal information loops are the universe's way of manifesting Gödel's incompleteness. Truths that exist without derivation, facts without foundations. There's something eerily similar to how consciousness works. Your thoughts are aware of themselves, creating loops of self-reference. You think about thinking, know that you know, remember remembering. Consciousness might be nothing more than information loops in the brain, patterns that observe themselves and in observing create the self that observes. The temporal version might be consciousness extended through time, rather than just through neural networks. But the information loop paradox faces a unique challenge that other temporal paradoxes don't. The problem of error. Information can be corrupted, miscopied, misunderstood. Even in our historian's case, what if she makes a transcription error when creating the document? What if the ink fades before she finds it? What if she misreads a word? Any error would break the loop or create a different loop, propagating changes that might amplify through iteration. This is where quantum mechanics might offer a resolution. In quantum computing, there's a concept called error correction through redundancy. Information is encoded across multiple quantum states so that errors can be detected and corrected. Perhaps temporal information loops have a similar mechanism, existing across multiple parallel timelines or quantum branches, with only the self-consistent version surviving. The universe might perform a kind of cosmic error checking, ensuring only stable information loops can exist. The paradox becomes even more complex when you consider translation and interpretation. The historian's document is in a language, but languages evolve. Words change meaning, contexts shift, cultural references become obscure. For the loop to work, the information must be not just preserved, but comprehensible across time. This suggests that successful information loops might be limited to mathematical or logical truths that transcend linguistic change, or they must include their own interpretive framework, becoming self-contained semantic universes. Think about the implications for communication. Every message you send is interpreted through the receiver's context, their knowledge, their assumptions. In a temporal information loop, you might be both sender and receiver, but separated by years of experience. The message you send to your past self must account for who you were, not who you are. The loop must include not just information, but empathy, understanding, a bridge across the temporal gulf between different versions of yourself. This brings us to a fascinating possibility. What if all information is already in loops, but we only perceive it linearly? What if every idea, every discovery, every creative act is part of vast temporal circuits that we can't see from our limited perspective? We think we're creating something new, but we're actually just completing loops that have always existed in the block universe of space-time. The physicist John Wheeler proposed something similar with his concept of it from bit. The idea that reality emerges from information. But if information can exist in temporal loops, then reality itself might be self-creating, bootstrapping itself into existence through closed chains of causation that have no beginning or end. The universe becomes a vast information loop, computing itself into being through its own self-consistency. As our historian sits in her study, contemplating the document she must someday place in the archives, she faces a terrible question. Does she have a choice? Can she decide not to complete the loop? If she destroys the document instead of preserving it, what happens to the 30 years of her life that depended on reading it? The information loop seems to trap her in inevitability, making her a prisoner of knowledge that exists outside normal causation. But perhaps there's freedom within the constraint. The document describes what she'll say, but not what she'll think. It records her words, but not her feelings. The information loop constrains certain aspects of reality while leaving others free. She might be bound to speak certain words at certain times, but the meaning she finds in them, the inner experience of speaking them, this remains hers to determine. This suggests a profound truth about information and experience. Information can be looped, copied, transmitted through time, but experience remains unique to each moment. The historian reading the document and the historian writing it decades later are the same person processing the same information, but their experiences are different, separated by 30 years of life. The loop preserves data, but not qualia, facts, but not feelings. Consider how this applies to memory. When you remember something, you're not retrieving stored information, but reconstructing experience from informational fragments. Each remembering is a new experience, even of the same information. If memories could travel through time in perfect loops, they would arrive as information to be experienced anew, not as experiences themselves. The loop would preserve what happened, but not what it felt like. The information loop paradox also raises questions about authorship and ownership. Who owns ideas that create themselves? Who deserves credit for discoveries that have no discoverer? If a temporal loop brings Shakespeare's plays into existence, is Shakespeare still the author? Or is he merely the scribe for information that authored itself? The loop destroys our notions of intellectual property, creativity, and human achievement. As you approach sleep, consider this. Every thought you have changes your brain, creating patterns that influence your future thoughts. Your mind is already full of information loops, ideas that reinforce themselves, beliefs that create evidence for themselves, expectations that fulfill themselves. The temporal version of the paradox might be no stranger than what's already happening in the feedback loops of consciousness. Tomorrow, you might have an idea that seems to come from nowhere. A solution to a problem, a creative inspiration, a sudden understanding. Where does it really come from? Is it emerging from the unconscious processing of your brain? Or could it be information completing a loop, arriving from a future where you'll share this idea with someone who'll ensure it reaches you in the past? The paradox suggests that origin might be the wrong question. Some information might simply exist, neither created nor destroyed, only discovered by those who complete its loops through time. The historian finally understands. The document isn't a trap, but a gift. Information that exists to prove that some things transcend normal causation. She'll preserve it in the archives, ensuring her younger self finds it, not because she must, but because she chooses to complete the loop. The information doesn't control her. She partners with it, helping it achieve the existence it has always had, will always have, is having right now in the eternal present of a loop that needs no beginning, because it has no end. The information loop paradox whispers that knowledge might be more fundamental than we imagine, that ideas might have their own existence independent of the minds that think them, that creativity might be less about generating something new and more about discovering what has always existed in the space of possible thoughts. It suggests that we are not just thinkers, but mediums through which information flows, completing circuits that span across time, participants in a vast exchange of knowledge that transcends the linear progression from ignorance to understanding. In the quiet before sleep, you might sense them, the loops of information flowing through time, ideas seeking minds to think them, knowledge waiting to be discovered by those who will ensure it was always there to be found. The paradox isn't a problem to be solved, but a glimpse into the deeper structure of reality, where information dances with itself across time, creating meaning through eternal recursion. Existing because it exists. True because it makes itself true. A message that is its own author. A question that is its own answer. A loop that completes itself through you. The closed time-like curve paradox. In the mathematics department at Princeton, 1949, a brilliant logician sits at his desk, pencil moving across paper, in strange, looping calculations. Kurt Gödel, Einstein's walking companion and closest intellectual friend, has discovered something that disturbs even him. His equations describe a universe that rotates, and in this rotating universe, space and time twist around each other like candy cane stripes. Follow one of these stripes far enough, and you arrive at your own past. Not through a machine, not through a wormhole, but simply by traveling through space in a particular direction. Time curves back on itself as naturally as the surface of Earth curves around to meet itself. These paths, these closed time-like curves, don't break physics. They emerge from Einstein's own equations, as valid as any other solution, as real as gravity itself. The closed time-like curve paradox isn't about the contradictions time travel might create. It's about something more unsettling. That time travel might be woven into the very geometry of space-time. That the universe might be structured in ways that make chronology not a law, but a local convention, like saying up on a sphere that has no true up or down. The paradox is that such curves can exist at all, that the mathematics we use to describe reality permits, even requires, the possibility of effects preceding causes. Imagine you're an ant walking on a cylinder. If you walk straight ahead, parallel to the cylinder's axis, you move forward in what seems like a straight line. But if you walk at an angle, spiraling around the cylinder, you might eventually arrive back where you started. You've traveled in what seemed like a straight path through your local space, but the global geometry brought you back to your beginning. Closed time-like curves work similarly, except the cylinder is space-time itself, and the journey that returns you to your starting point takes you through time as well as space. Gödel's rotating universe was the first example, but physicists have since found closed time-like curves in many solutions to Einstein's equations. Near rotating black holes, in the vicinity of infinite rotating cylinders, inside traversable wormholes, around cosmic strings. Wherever space-time gets twisted enough, these loops appear. They're not errors or approximations. They're what the mathematics says should exist given certain conditions. The universe's operating system includes time travel in its basic code. But here's what makes this truly strange. On a closed time-like curve, there is no universal before or after. Events don't have a fixed chronological order. What counts as past or future depends on your path through space-time. Two observers might disagree not just about when something happened, but about whether it has happened yet or happened already. Time becomes relative not just in its rate, as Einstein showed, but in its very direction. Think about what this means for causation. We understand cause and effect through temporal sequence. First the cause, then the effect. But on a closed time-like curve, every event is both before and after every other event. The match lights the fire, but the fire also lights the match. The chicken lays the egg that hatches the chicken that lays the egg. Causation becomes circular. Or perhaps causation as we understand it simply stops making sense. I find myself thinking about a thought experiment called the Polchinski paradox, which we discussed earlier with billiard balls. But the closed time-like curve version is even purer. The ball doesn't need a time machine. It just follows a path through curved space-time that happens to loop back. No technology required, no intervention needed. The universe's geometry alone creates the paradox. It's like discovering that walking straight ahead in your city sometimes takes you backward through your own life. The mathematician and physicist Roger Penrose proposed something called the cosmic censorship hypothesis, suggesting that the universe might hide these problematic regions behind event horizons where they can't affect the outside world. But even if true, this doesn't eliminate closed time-like curves. It just quarantines them. They still exist in the mathematics, still represent valid solutions to the equations that govern reality. The universe permits them, even if it hides them. What disturbs physicists most about closed time-like curves isn't their paradoxical nature, but their naturalness. They emerge from general relativity as easily as elliptical orbits emerge from Newton's laws. You don't need exotic matter or impossible energies. You just need space-time curved in particular ways, and the universe seems perfectly capable of creating such curvatures. Near the Big Bang, when the entire universe was dense and violently dynamic, closed time-like curves might have been common. This raises a startling possibility. What if the early universe was full of closed time-like curves? What if causation as we know it only emerged later, as the universe expanded and cooled? The orderly progression from cause to effect that we take for granted might be a recent development, cosmically speaking. In the beginning, past and future might have been thoroughly mixed. Events causing themselves, effects preceding causes. Time tied in knots that only gradually straightened out. Consider what this means for the origin of the universe itself. We ask what caused the Big Bang, but if the early universe contained closed time-like curves, it might have caused itself. The universe might be the ultimate bootstrap paradox, creating itself through loops in space-time that existed when time itself was still forming. The question, what came before, becomes meaningless. If before didn't exist as a coherent concept until the universe had already begun. The physicist Stephen Hawking proposed something called the chronology protection conjecture, arguing that the laws of physics must somehow prevent closed time-like curves from forming, or at least prevent them from creating paradoxes. But this remains a conjecture, unproven and perhaps unprovable. The universe might protect chronology, or it might not care about our paradoxes at all. In quantum mechanics, closed time-like curves become even stranger. A quantum particle traveling along such a curve doesn't have a definite path, but exists in a superposition of all possible paths. The particle might interact with itself, creating what physicists call a quantum time loop. These loops don't create paradoxes in the classical sense, but instead generate what David Deutsch called fixed-point solutions. Self-consistent quantum states that remain unchanged despite the temporal loop. Imagine a quantum computer with access to a closed time-like curve. It could solve problems that are impossible for normal quantum computers. finding solutions by trying all possibilities simultaneously across time, as well as across quantum states. The closed time-like curve becomes a computational resource, turning temporal paradox into processing power. The universe might use such curves to compute its own existence, solving the equations that govern reality through temporal as well as quantum superposition. But there's something even more profound to consider. If closed time-like curves exist, then the distinction between past, present, and future might be an artifact of our limited perspective. We experience time linearly because we follow time-like paths that don't close, but the universe itself might be thoroughly temporal, with all moments equally real and mutually accessible. What we call the flow of time might be just our trajectory through a static four-dimensional structure where past and future are directions like left and right. This connects to something called the block-universe interpretation of relativity. In this view, space-time is a four-dimensional block where all events, past, present, and future, exist eternally. We experience this block sequentially, moment by moment, but the entire structure is already there. Closed time-like curves are just paths through this block that happen to loop back, like hiking trails that circle around to their starting point. The paradox deepens when you consider consciousness. We experience ourselves as continuous beings moving through time, but on a closed time-like curve, you could meet yourself, interact with yourself, even prevent your own existence. Which version is the real you? The one who remembers less because they're younger, or the one who remembers more because they're older? Or are both equally real, 2 points on a curve that happens to intersect itself? A thought experiment. You're traveling along a closed time-like curve, not knowing it. You live your life, make decisions, form memories. Eventually, your path curves back and you encounter your younger self. But from your younger self's perspective, they're encountering their older self. Both of you are moving forward through your own subjective time, but those forward directions point toward each other's past. You're both cause and effect, both earlier and later, both the one who influences and the one who is influenced. The closed time-like curve paradox suggests that our entire conception of time might be wrong. We think of time as a river flowing from past to future, but perhaps it's more like an ocean with currents that sometimes eddy and spiral, creating whirlpools where past and future mix. We happen to be riding a current that flows steadily forward, but other currents might flow backward or in circles. The paradox isn't that such curves can exist, but that we assumed they couldn't. In some interpretations of string theory, our universe is a four-dimensional membrane floating in a higher dimensional space. Closed time-like curves might be places where our membrane curves back and touches itself, creating shortcuts through time just as a folded piece of paper creates shortcuts through space. From our perspective within the membrane, these look like temporal paradoxes. From outside, they might be no stranger than any other geometric feature. The physicist Lee Smolin has proposed that the laws of physics themselves might evolve through a kind of cosmic natural selection, with universes that create black holes spawning new universes with slightly different laws. If closed time-like curves can exist, they might play a role in this evolution, allowing information from future universes to influence past ones, creating feedback loops that guide the development of physical law itself. As you lie there in the darkness, consider this. Your future light cone, the region of space-time you can influence, extends forward from this moment. Your past light cone, the region that can influence you, extends backward. In normal space-time, these cones never intersect themselves, but near a closed time-like curve, your future light cone might curve around to intersect your past light cone. You could influence events that influence you, create causes that create themselves, participate in loops of causation that have no beginning or end. The mathematics allows it. General relativity permits it. Only our intuition rebels, insisting that time must flow in one direction, that causes must precede effects, that the past is fixed and the future is open. But intuition evolved in a region of space-time where closed time-like curves are rare or absent. We're like flatland beings trying to understand three-dimensional knots. The structure exists, but our perspective makes it seem paradoxical. Tomorrow, you'll wake and move forward through time in the ordinary way, following a time-like curve that doesn't close, at least not that you'll notice. But somewhere in the universe, perhaps near a rotating black hole, or in the quantum foam at the Planck scale, closed time-like curves might exist. Events might be causing themselves, effects preceding causes, the future creating the past that creates the future. The closed time-like curve paradox isn't just about time travel. It's about the nature of time itself, about whether chronology is fundamental or emergent, about whether the universe has a preferred direction in time, or whether all directions are equally valid. It suggests that paradox might not be a flaw in our thinking, but a feature of reality, that the universe might be stranger than we can imagine, that time itself might be a far more flexible and mysterious dimension than our everyday experience suggests. Gödel never published his thoughts on the philosophical implications of his rotating universe. He found the mathematics beautiful, but the consequences disturbing. Here was proof that time travel wasn't forbidden by physics, that the universe could tie time in knots. That chronology might be an illusion we impose on a reality that doesn't share our concern for cause and effect. He had used Einstein's own equations to show that Einstein's intuitions about time were incomplete. In the end, the closed time-like curve paradox leaves us with a choice. We can assume that something, quantum effects, cosmic censorship, chronology protection, prevents these curves from creating real paradoxes. Or we can accept that paradoxes might be part of reality's structure, that the universe might not be obligated to make sense to minds that evolved in a small corner of space-time where time happens to flow in one direction. The curves loop through space-time, carrying travelers back to their own past, forward to their own future, around and around in endless spirals that respect the mathematics but violate our intuitions. They exist in the equations, these paths that make time circular, that turn chronology into topology, that transform paradox from impossibility to itinerary. Whether they exist in reality remains unknown, but their possibility haunts physics, reminding us that time might not be the simple, one-way street we navigate every day, but rather a complex manifold where past and future meet. Causation curves back on itself, and the impossible becomes inevitable through the simple geometry of space-time itself. The infinite causal regress paradox. A time traveler stands at the control panel of their machine, about to journey backward 100 years. But wait, to arrive in the past, they must first travel to a moment halfway there, 50 years ago. But to reach that point, they must first arrive 25 years in the past, and to get there, 12.5 years. The journey fragments into infinite steps, each requiring infinite sub-steps, like Zeno's arrow that must traverse infinite halfway points to reach its target. How can the traveler complete infinite actions in finite time? Yet if they cannot, how does anyone travel through time at all, even at the normal rate of 1 second per second? This is the infinite causal regress paradox in time travel, where the very act of moving through time seems to require an infinite sequence of causes and effects, each depending on countless others, regressing endlessly into a causal abyss from which no action could ever emerge. It's not about changing the past or creating loops, but about whether temporal movement itself is logically possible when examined closely enough. Consider your own existence in this moment. You're here because of your past. The breakfast you ate, the sleep you had, the day you lived yesterday. But that day depended on the day before, which depended on the day before that. Reaching back through your birth, your parents' meeting, the evolution of humanity, the formation of Earth, the Big Bang itself. Your presence in this moment seems to require an infinite chain of causes stretching back eternally. How can an infinite sequence ever complete itself to produce this finite moment of now? The paradox becomes more acute with time travel because it makes the causal chains visible and problematic. A normal person existing through time can ignore the infinite regress. It's already happened after all. But a time traveler must actively create their path through time, and creating that path seems to require completing infinite tasks. It's like trying to write down all the decimal places of pi before you can circle a square, or counting to infinity before you can take a single step. I think about this whenever I consider the smallest units of time. Physicists speak of Planck time, about 10 × 43 seconds, possibly the shortest meaningful duration in our universe. But even Planck time can be subdivided mathematically. Between any two moments, no matter how close, infinite instants exist. The time traveler must somehow traverse these infinite instants, experience infinite moments, create infinite causal connections, all to move from now to then. This connects to an ancient paradox from Zeno of Elea about Achilles and the tortoise. Achilles can never catch a tortoise with a head start, because first he must reach where the tortoise began, but by then the tortoise has moved forward. He must then reach that new position, but the tortoise has moved again. The gap shrinks, but never disappears, creating infinite tasks that seemingly prevent motion itself. We know Achilles does catch the tortoise, just as we know time travelers in our thought experiments do reach the past. But how? The mathematician Georg Cantor gave us ways to think about infinity that might help. He showed that some infinities are larger than others, that infinite sets can be completed and manipulated, that the infinite isn't necessarily paradoxical. Perhaps the infinite causal steps in time travel are like the infinite points on a line. Uncountably many, yet traversable. You don't need to touch each point individually to move across the line. You simply move, and in moving, you traverse them all simultaneously. But time travel adds a twist that simple motion doesn't have: intentionality and causation. Each moment of the journey backward through time seems to require a decision, an action, a cause producing an effect. The traveler must somehow cause themselves to exist at each intermediate point, maintaining their coherence as they slide against time's normal flow. It's not passive like falling, but active like climbing. And climbing infinite steps seems impossible, even if falling past infinite points is not. Think about what happens to causation itself during time travel. In normal time, causes precede effects in neat sequence. But a traveler moving backward experiences effects before causes, sees outcomes before origins, arrives at destinations before departing. Their personal causation runs counter to universal causation, creating a kind of causal friction. Every moment of backward travel must somehow overcome the forward pressure of causality itself, like swimming upstream in a river of consequence. The paradox deepens when you consider that the time traveler must maintain their own causal coherence while violating universal causation. Their atoms must stay organized, their memories intact, their consciousness continuous, even as they move through a reversal of entropy where everything else tends toward disorder. They must somehow be causally isolated from the backward flowing time while still interacting with it enough to exist within it. It's like being wet while repelling water, present while absent, causing while uncaused. This brings us to something philosophers call the grounding problem. Every fact seems to need grounding in some deeper fact. Every cause requires a prior cause. Every explanation demands further explanation. Time travel makes this usually hidden regress visible and problematic. The traveler's arrival in the past needs to be grounded in their departure from the future. But that departure needs grounding in their decision to travel, which needs grounding in their existence, which needs grounding in the history they're about to change. The grounding curves back on itself, creating not just circles, but infinite spirals of causation. Some physicists suggest that time travel might require what they call a preferred foliation of space-time, a unique way of slicing four-dimensional space-time into three-dimensional moments. The traveler would move between these slices rather than through the continuous manifold of space-time. This would reduce the infinite regress to a finite, though perhaps very large, number of discrete jumps. Time travel becomes digital rather than analog, quantum rather than continuous. But this solution raises its own questions. Who or what determines the preferred foliation? Why should space-time come pre-sliced in a way convenient for time travelers? It seems to require exactly the kind of absolute time that Einstein's relativity eliminated. The cure might be worse than the disease, solving infinite regress by reintroducing concepts physics has abandoned. Consider another approach. Perhaps the infinite regress is real but not problematic. In calculus, we routinely sum infinite series to get finite results. The infinite geometric series, 1 2 plus, 1 4 plus, 1 8 plus, 1 16, equals exactly 1. Maybe the infinite causal steps in time travel similarly sum to a finite journey. Each step might be infinitesimally small, contributing an infinitesimal portion to the total travel, all adding up to one complete trip through time. This mathematical resolution is elegant, but doesn't address the philosophical problem. Even if infinite causes can produce finite effects, how do they do so? What makes the series converge rather than diverge? What ensures that the infinite steps of time travel add up to arrival in the past rather than eternal suspension between moments? The mathematics might work, but the metaphysics remains mysterious. The paradox becomes even more complex when you consider the direction of explanation. We normally explain the present through the past. This happened because that happened earlier. But in time travel, especially backward time travel, the explanation might run the other way. The traveler arrives in the past because they will depart from the future. The cause comes after the effect. The explanation follows what it explains. This reversal doesn't eliminate infinite regress, but doubles it. Now we have infinite causes stretching in both temporal directions. A thought experiment illuminates this. Imagine 2 time travelers, one going backward, one forward, passing each other in the year 1850. Each sees the other moving the wrong direction through time. Which one's causation is correct? From the backward traveler's perspective, the forward traveler is reversing cause and effect. From the forward traveler's view, it's the backward traveler who has causation confused. There's no absolute frame to determine who's right. Causation itself becomes relative, and with it, the entire structure of explanation and grounding that we use to understand reality. The infinite regress paradox also appears in the information carried by the time traveler. They bring knowledge from the future, but that knowledge was gained through a causal process that hasn't happened yet from the past perspective. The information exists without its causal history, like a book without an author, a message without a sender. The traveler's memories are effects without causes, at least without causes that exist in the timeline they've entered. This connects to something in quantum mechanics called the measurement problem. A quantum system exists in superposition until measured, at which point it collapses to a definite state. But what counts as measurement? Does the measuring device need to be measured? Does that measurement need measurement? The regress seems infinite, yet somehow measurements happen. Superpositions collapse. Reality crystallizes from possibility. Perhaps time travel involves a similar mystery. Infinite regresses that somehow resolve into finite journeys. Think about consciousness itself as a form of time travel. Your awareness moves from moment to moment, carrying memories of the past and anticipations of the future. But how does consciousness move through time? What causes you to be conscious now rather than then? The question leads to an infinite regress. You're conscious now because you were conscious a moment ago, but that requires explanation too, spiraling back to when? Your first moment of consciousness. But what caused that? The regress has no satisfactory terminus. The philosopher Immanuel Kant argued that infinite causal regress proves that time must have a beginning, a first cause that needs no prior cause. But time travel seems to allow effects to be their own causes, events to explain themselves, causal chains to form closed loops that need no external grounding. The infinite regress might not need to terminate in a first cause, but could curve back on itself, creating finite loops from infinite sequences. As you drift towards sleep, consider the infinite regress of your own thoughts. Each thought seems caused by the previous thought, reaching back to where? When did the chain of thinking begin? How did the first thought arise from non-thought? And if you could travel backward through your stream of consciousness, would you find a beginning, or just an infinite regression of awareness emerging from itself? The infinite causal regress paradox in time travel might be telling us something profound about the nature of causation itself. Perhaps causation isn't fundamental, but emergent, arising from patterns in space-time rather than governing them. Perhaps the infinite regress is always there, hidden beneath our everyday experience, and time travel just makes it visible. Perhaps trying to ground each moment in previous moments is the wrong approach entirely. Maybe moments ground themselves, exist independently, Connect through correlation rather than causation. Tomorrow, you'll wake and continue your journey through time at the conventional rate. But that journey involves the same infinite regress as any time travel. Between now and tomorrow morning, you must traverse infinite moments, complete infinite transitions, sustain infinite causal connections. Yet you will wake tomorrow, the infinite somehow summed into finite, the paradox resolved through the simple act of persistence. The time traveler at their control panel faces the same mystery magnified. To reach the past, they must complete an infinite journey in finite time, create infinite causes producing finite effects, maintain coherence across infinite discontinuities. It seems impossible, yet in our thought experiments, they succeed. They arrive in the past, infinite regress notwithstanding, paradox dissolved in the act of arrival. Perhaps that's the deepest lesson of the infinite causal regress paradox, that reality doesn't wait for philosophical problems to be solved before proceeding. Motion happens despite Zeno's paradoxes. Consciousness exists despite explanatory gaps. And in universes where time travel is possible, travelers reach their destinations despite infinite causal regresses. The paradox doesn't prevent the journey. It just reminds us that even the simplest acts, when examined closely enough, reveal infinite depths. The regress continues, cause before cause. Explanation beneath explanation, beneath explanation. An infinite excavation that never reaches bedrock because there is no bedrock, only more depth, more causation, more steps in a journey that somehow completes itself despite having no first step, no prime mover, no ultimate ground. The traveler moves through time not by solving the infinite regress, but by embodying it, becoming themselves an infinite sequence collapsed into finite form, a paradox resolved through existence rather than logic, a question answered by being asked. In the end, the infinite causal regress paradox leaves us not with impossibility, but with mystery. It shows us that our everyday experience of cause and effect, of temporal sequence, of grounded explanation, might be a surface simplification of something far deeper and stranger. Time travel doesn't create the infinite regress. It reveals it, forces us to confront the groundlessness that was always there, hidden beneath our assumptions about how one moment becomes the next. The traveler presses the button, begins their journey, traverses infinite instants in finite time. They arrive in the past, carrying with them all the paradoxes of causation, all the infinite regresses of explanation, all the mysteries of how moments connect across the strange territory of time. They are proof that infinite sequences can converge, that paradoxes can be lived even if not resolved, that the impossible recession of cause and effect doesn't prevent effect and cause, that reality transcends the logical problems it creates. The paradox of the timeless observer. In a laboratory that exists outside of time, though how such a place could exist challenges language itself. An observer watches the universe unfold. They see your birth and death simultaneously, your first word and last breath as concurrent events, every moment of your life spread out like a map rather than experienced as a journey. To this timeless observer, your entire existence is a static sculpture in 4 dimensions, beautiful and complete. But here's the paradox that breaks minds. If they observe everything at once, when do they observe it? If they think about what they see, don't their thoughts require time to unfold? How can consciousness exist without temporal sequence, without before and after, without the flow from question to understanding? This is the paradox of the timeless observer, perhaps the most fundamental puzzle about time travel, because it questions whether it's possible to step outside time at all, whether consciousness can exist without duration, whether observation itself requires the very temporal framework the observer supposedly transcends. Imagine you could freeze time, stopping everything except your own consciousness. You walk through a world of statues, observing moments caught like insects in amber. But walking takes time. Observing takes time. Thinking about what you observe takes time. Even if you've stopped universal time, you must exist in some kind of personal time to have any experience at all. The paradox multiplies. In whose time do you think while time is stopped? What clock measures your observations of a frozen universe? I think about this whenever physicists describe seeing the universe from outside, looking at space-time as a four-dimensional block where all moments exist eternally. This God's eye view appears in many theories, from Einstein's relativity to modern cosmology. But the view requires a viewer, and viewing seems inherently temporal. The paradox isn't just philosophical wordplay, it strikes at the heart of what it means to observe, to know, to be conscious of anything at all. Consider what observation actually involves. Light or information travels from the observed to the observer. The observer's brain processes this information, comparing it to memories, forming judgments, creating understanding. Each step requires change, and change requires time. An observer without time would be like a camera without film, a computer without processing cycles, a potential for observation that never actualizes into observing. The paradox deepens when you realize that the timeless observer must somehow contain knowledge of temporal sequences while experiencing no sequences themselves. They must know that your childhood preceded your adulthood, that causes led to effects, that stories had beginnings and endings, all while existing in a state where precedence, causation, and narrative are meaningless. They must understand time without experiencing it, like knowing what red means while seeing only in black and white. Scientists studying black holes have encountered a version of this paradox. From outside a black hole, an observer watches someone fall in. Due to time dilation, the falling person appears to slow down and freeze at the event horizon, their final moment stretched to infinity. But from the falling person's perspective, they pass through the horizon normally. Who's right? Both are, according to relativity. But this creates a paradox. The outside observer sees a frozen moment that, from another perspective, has already passed. They're observing something that both is and isn't still happening. This connects to something called the block universe interpretation of time, which we've touched on before. In this view, the universe is a four-dimensional block where all moments, past, present, and future, exist eternally. We experience this block sequentially, moment by moment, but from outside, all moments are equally real and present. The timeless observer would see this complete block, your entire life laid out like a timeline they can examine all at once. But here's the problem. Examining takes time. Even if all moments of your life are simultaneously visible, the observer must direct their attention from one moment to another. Attention is inherently selective and sequential. You can't pay attention to everything at once any more than you can read all the words on this page simultaneously. The timeless observer would need time to observe time, duration to perceive the durationless. Think about memory for a moment. Your memories allow you to, in a sense, observe the past from the present. You can recall your 10th birthday, your first kiss, what you had for breakfast. But remembering takes time. The memories exist in your brain as patterns, but experiencing them, thinking about them, comparing them. All of this unfolds temporally. A timeless observer would need to access all memories simultaneously, which seems less like remembering and more like, what? We don't have words for it because all our concepts of knowledge assume temporal experience. The paradox becomes even stranger when you consider decision and action. Could a timeless observer choose what to observe? Choice implies alternatives, deliberation, selection, all temporal processes. An observer who sees everything at once cannot choose to look at one thing rather than another, because rather than implies a temporal sequence of attention. They would be frozen in eternal observation of everything, unable to focus, analyze, or understand in any way we would recognize as understanding. This brings us to consciousness itself. Most theories of consciousness involve some kind of information integration over time. Neurons fire, patterns form, thoughts emerge from the temporal interaction of brain states. The philosopher William James wrote about the stream of consciousness, emphasizing its flowing, temporal nature. Consciousness without time might not be consciousness at all, but something else entirely, as different from our awareness as a painting is from a movie. Yet, mystics throughout history have described experiences of timelessness, moments of consciousness where past, present, and future seem to merge into an eternal now. During meditation, in near-death experiences, under the influence of certain substances, people report stepping outside the normal flow of time while maintaining some form of awareness. Are these glimpses of timeless observation, or are they temporal experiences of imagined timelessness? The physicist Julian Barbour has proposed that time might be emergent rather than fundamental, that the universe consists of nows, complete configurations of everything, and time is just how these nows are organized. In his view, a timeless observer wouldn't see motion, but would see all the nows at once, like looking at every frame of a film simultaneously. But even this doesn't escape the paradox. Organizing nows into a comprehensible pattern would seem to require temporal processing. Quantum mechanics adds another layer to the paradox. In the many worlds interpretation, every quantum event branches the universe into multiple timelines. A timeless observer would need to see not just one timeline, but all possible timelines, an infinite branching tree of realities. They would observe every possible version of your life, every choice made and unmade, every quantum coin flip going both ways. The information content would be not just vast, but infinite. Could even a timeless mind comprehend infinite information all at once? There's a thought experiment in philosophy called Mary the Color Scientist. Mary knows everything about color scientifically, but has never experienced color directly. When she finally sees red, does she learn something new? The timeless observer faces a similar puzzle. They might know everything about time intellectually, but never experience duration, sequence, or change. Would they really understand time? Or would they be like Mary before seeing color? Possessing all the facts but missing the experience? Consider how language works for such an observer. Language unfolds in time. Words follow words, sentences build meaning sequentially. A timeless observer would need to comprehend all utterances simultaneously, every conversation happening at once, all books being written and read in the same eternal moment. The Babel would be incomprehensible, meaning dissolved in simultaneity. Mathematics might offer an escape. Mathematical truths seem to exist timelessly. The Pythagorean theorem doesn't become true or cease being true, it simply is. Perhaps a timeless observer could think in pure mathematics, comprehending reality through eternal equations, rather than temporal experience. But even mathematical thinking, as humans do it, involves temporal processes of proof, derivation, and understanding. The paradox touches on free will too. If a timeless observer sees all moments at once, they see every decision already made, every choice already chosen. From their perspective, the universe might appear completely deterministic, a fixed pattern with no freedom, no genuine alternatives, no real possibilities, just actualities spread across the dimension we call time. Yet from within time, choices feel real, the future seems open, possibilities matter. As you lie there approaching sleep, your consciousness flickering between wakefulness and dreams, you might be as close as humans get to timeless observation. In the hypnagogic state between waking and sleeping, time becomes fluid. Past and future blend, memories and imaginations merge. The sequential stream of consciousness becomes a pool where all thoughts exist simultaneously. Yet even this is not truly timeless. It's time experienced differently, not time transcended. The paradox of the timeless observer might be telling us something crucial about consciousness itself. That awareness and temporality are inseparable. That to observe is necessarily to experience duration. That consciousness is not something that exists in time, but something that is time, or at least requires time, as fundamentally as fish require water. Perhaps the error is in imagining observation can be separated from participation. The timeless observer is usually conceived as standing outside the universe, looking in. But quantum mechanics suggests that observation is participation, that to observe is to interact, to become entangled with what's observed. A truly timeless observer might not be able to observe at all, frozen in eternal potential observation that never actualizes into actual observing. Or perhaps timeless observation is possible, but would be so alien to our temporal consciousness that we couldn't recognize it as observation. It might be less like seeing and more like being, less like knowing, and more like existing. The timeless observer might not watch the universe unfold, but simply be the space in which it unfolds. Not a consciousness observing time, but the condition that makes time possible. Tomorrow. A concept that would mean nothing to our timeless observer. You'll wake and resume your journey through time. You'll observe moments sequentially, think thoughts in order, experience duration and change. Your consciousness will flow through time like water through a riverbed, unable to see the whole river at once, but knowing it intimately through the experience of flowing. The timeless observer remains a paradox, a limit case of consciousness that might be impossible, or might be pointing towards something beyond current understanding. They would see your entire life. Indeed, all lives, all moments, all possibilities, spread out in eternal presence. But could they understand what they see? Could they think about it without thinking in time? Could they be conscious without the change that consciousness seems to require? The paradox whispers that time and mind might be more intimately connected than we imagine, that consciousness doesn't just happen in time, but might be time itself. The subjective experience of information integrating, patterns forming, understanding emerging. The timeless observer might be impossible not because we lack imagination, but because observation itself is inherently temporal, a process rather than a state, a journey rather than a position. In the end, the paradox of the timeless observer leaves us with a mirror that reflects our own temporal nature. We imagine stepping outside time to observe it whole, but the stepping, the observing, the wholeness, all require the very time we're trying to transcend. We are temporal beings trying to think about timelessness, like fish trying to imagine waterlessness, using concepts that dissolve the moment they succeed. The observer outside time watches everything and nothing, knows all and understands none, exists in eternal frozen potential that never becomes actual. They are the impossible limit of consciousness, the paradox that proves the rule. That to think is to think in time, to observe is to change, to be conscious is to flow from moment to moment in the stream we're trying to see from shore. The timeless observer observes that they cannot observe, knows that they cannot know, exists in the eternal paradox of consciousness trying to transcend its own conditions. A strange loop that neither time nor timelessness can resolve.